Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to the chilly, drafty corridors of Elizabethan England, where powdered wigs are tight. Chamber pots are worse, and something utterly terrifying is bubbling in the kitchen. You creep through a narrow stone hallway lit by flickering tallow candles. The air smells like boiled something. You hear the low thrum of lutes from a distant room. Servants scurry past hunched and harried. You follow the scent. There, in a great cauldron suspended above a soot-blackened hearth, something leafy and wet stirs with a slow, suspicious bubble. A cook squints at it, muttering about humors and herbal counteragents. You lean in cautiously. It's cabbage, just cabbage. But judging by the way the serving boy crosses himself, you'd think it was a bubbling pot of actual sin. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from a castle cottage or probably your bed, go ahead and post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in the Queen's summer estate visiting as part of some vague diplomatic arrangement that's mostly an excuse for nobles to show off their embroidered slippers. The rooms are gorgeous but cold, the gardens are vast and full of bees, and the food. Well, the food is trying. At supper, you're seated near the end of a long oak table lined with waxy-eyed courtiers who look like they haven't smiled since the invention of lace. A bowl is passed your way, steaming slightly, its contents grayish-green and wet. You peek in. It's a pile of shredded cabbage, lightly glazed and surrounded by nervous glances. You reach for a spoon. A hand stops you. Don't, whispers the lord beside you. His wig trembles slightly. It's the cabbage. You hesitate, spoon halfway to destiny. Turns out you've arrived in the middle of something no one wants to admit aloud, a slow-burning, faintly ridiculous, absolutely real cabbage panic, sweeping through England's upper crust. No one says it outright, of course, that would be vulgar. But everyone knows the cabbage has a reputation, not for poisoning, not exactly, but for disturbing things, dreams, digestion, social order. The rumors vary. Some say it causes night sweats and ghost sightings. Others claim a single leaf can unbalance the four humors so badly that your blood turns melancholic and you start writing sonnets to your own elbows. There's even a story about a baron who wept uncontrollably after eating pickled cabbage, swearing he heard his deceased grandmother whispering insults in Flemish. You'd think a vegetable couldn't cause this much fear, but here in the gilded halls of Elizabethan nobility, fear often wears frills. And cabbage is peasant food, which to the elite is practically plague adjacent. Of course, that's not stopping the cooks. They keep serving it, sneaking it in, dressing it up, braising it until it barely resembles itself. Because cabbage is hardy. It grows well. It fills you up. And deep down, everyone knows it's actually good for you. But admitting that would be like admitting you enjoyed a warm ale with a farmer, socially catastrophic. You wander through the manor after dinner, head fogged by roasted goose and conversational Latin. In the kitchens, a few staff huddle around the hearth, whispering about the latest leaf-related incident. You listen, half hidden behind a shelf of pickled eels. Apparently last week, a lady-in-waiting fainted during a supper of braised greens. She claimed she saw a green ghost with the face of her betrothed floating in her bowl. The only vegetable in question, cabbage, specifically slaw. The word is spoken in hushed tones like a curse. One servant nods solemnly. It's always the raw ones, he says. They slip past the liver. You step back quietly, trying to process the madness. Back in your room, wrapped in too many wool blankets and wondering if the walls are supposed to smell like mildew and cloves. You remember something you overheard in the library earlier, a scholar muttering about the social threat of greens. And weirdly, it's starting to make sense. Cabbage doesn't fit the elite narrative. It's not foreign, it's not exotic, it's not embroidered in gold or imported in jeweled crates. It grows in mud, it's served in bowls. It speaks to a kind of earthy, unapologetic reality that makes nobles deeply uncomfortable. You drift towards sleep with a bizarre question forming in your cabbage-addled brain. What if this leafy thing isn't just a vegetable? What if it's a mirror? Historians still argue whether Elizabethan nobles genuinely feared cabbage or simply used it as a scapegoat for broader anxieties about class digestion or their ever-looming mortality. But the records are clear, something about the leaf deeply unsettled the powdered elite. You dream of a banquet hall overrun by talking vegetables and roughs, one of whom insists you try his slaw for the good of the kingdom. You do. You weep. You wake up. There's cabbage stew waiting for breakfast. Of course there is. You stir your breakfast slowly, watching the cabbage swirl in slow circles like it's trying to hypnotize you. It smells faintly of cloves, regret, and something that might be onion if onions had been dried over church incense for 3 years and then salted by a Puritan. Across the table, a young noble stares into his own bowl as though it's whispering secrets. He's wearing ruffled sleeves and the expression of a man who's seen too much leafage in too short a time. No one says a word. The silence is broken only when the steward walks in with a scroll and a sigh. The Queen requests an additional guest at today's luncheon, he announces. Groans ripple gently like low tide against a lace curtain. Luncheon means more food, which means more cabbage. Because once something starts appearing in every meal at an Elizabethan estate, rarely stops. It just becomes part of the routine, like powdered wigs or inherited syphilis. You tag along curious. The Queen naturally won't be present. Luncheon just means that someone marginally less important than the monarch will be there, and everyone will have to pretend that beet salad is a personality. In the grand hall, the meal is already in progress. On the table, pheasant-stewed apples, suspiciously translucent aspic, and of course a bowl of something green and wet sitting dead center, as though daring you to acknowledge it. You do not, but someone else does. A noblewoman new to court lifts her spoon and scoops an alarming portion of the cabbage heap. She eats it. She smiles. Audible gasps. A fork clatters. Someone mutters brave. And then comes the most terrifying sound of all, a satisfied sigh. This is how it starts. Not the cabbage revolution, no, we're not quite there yet. But the discomfort. The slow crawl of unease among people who've spent their lives convinced that boiled greens are either medicinal or medieval. The nobleman beside you leans in. She's French, he whispers. They like that sort of thing. You nod solemnly as if this explains everything. In truth, it sort of does. Because in Elizabethan England, cuisine is both deeply political and weirdly nationalistic. French influence is seen as simultaneously chic and suspicious. A cabbage-loving Frenchwoman's social dynamite. Culinary anarchy. The rest of the table tries to act normal. Conversation shifts toward weather, fashion, and how awfully dramatic gooseberries have been this season. But the cabbage bowl is the silent guest. Watching, waiting, wilting slightly. And here's where it gets interesting. As soon as the French noblewoman leaves politely, elegantly possibly humming a heretical tune under her breath. The others descend on her plate. One lady pretends to adjust the napkin but sniffs the cabbage heap. Another pokes it lightly with her spoon like testing the warmth of a scrying mirror. You, of course, try some. It's fine. Actually, it's good. Tender, garlicky, a little tangy like someone took the time to understand flavor instead of boiling it into submission. You look around. No one wants to say it, but you could see it on their powdered faces. They liked it too. But admitting that would mean something dangerous. Because in this era, food is identity. And cabbage, despite being full of nutrients and resilience and oddly soothing textures, is identity for the wrong kind of person. The commoner, the laborer. The one who doesn't have time to turn every meal into a decorative sculpture of status and geopolitical allegory. Historians still debate how widespread the noble resistance to cabbage truly was. Some argue that it was mostly a matter of fashion, cabbage wasn't banned, just ignored. Others insist the fear went deeper, tied to humoral medicine superstition, and the growing tension between imported elegance and domestic necessity. Back in the kitchen, the staff whispers. That one asked for seconds, someone says. Of the leaf. The cook raises an eyebrow. And didn't faint. Didn't even burp. You poke around mildly curious and find a serving boy carrying a small pot wrapped in cloth. He glances around, then tips the lid to show you what's inside. Cabbage, but brighter, spiced, slightly sweet. New recipe, he says, from the herbs lady. You take a cautious sniff. It smells like a spring afternoon where no one has insulted your hat. The cook steps closer, folding her arms. I've seen 20 nobles eat goose liver wrapped in eel skin without blinking, she says. But a bowl of chopped greens and they start writing letters to God. There's a pause. Should I take it off the menu? No, you say. Double it. That night, the rumor spreads. Did you hear someone smiled after eating cabbage? You hear it whispered by the fire, repeated by candlelight. Sung softly by a lute player who doesn't quite realize how close he's skating to musical sedition. The nobles pretend not to listen. They sip wine. They murmur about harvest yields, but their eyes drift again and again to the kitchen doors, to the scent in the air, to the memory of a single French noblewoman who didn't flinch when offered a spoonful of shame. You lie in bed later watching shadows crawl across the ceiling and wonder, what if the thing they feared wasn't cabbage? What if it was enjoying it? You wake to rain, not the poetic kind, more the slow, clingy drizzle that turns cobblestone paths into puddled regret and makes wool stockings a form of medieval torture. You shuffle down to breakfast in the same outfit as yesterday because, let's be honest, that's what cloaks are for. In the dining room, the air is oddly tense. Not angry, just stifled. Like everyone agreed not to mention a certain topic and now can't think of anything else. The table's quieter than usual. No one is touching the bowls of dried fruit or the strangely crunchy porridge. There's no cabbage on the table this morning, which should be a relief. It's not, because now the absence speaks louder than the presence ever did. The French noblewoman is gone reassigned to Bath. Someone mutters, and so is the curious cook who made that suspiciously delicious cabbage dish. The staff won't say why. You get a vague answer about inventory misconduct and inappropriate seasoning enthusiasm. But, you've been here long enough to recognize the signs. The cabbage crackdown has begun. No one's admitting it out loud. But the nobles are shifting in their seats, canceling banquets, consulting physicians about leaf-induced vapors. The kitchens have been issued new rules: nothing green unless it's parsley and only if it's decorative. You step outside for some air and find yourself walking past the herb garden. It's usually buzzing with activity. Herbalists, gardeners, apprentice cooks snipping sprigs like culinary alchemists. Today it's empty, except for a single gardener hunched under a cloak trimming a rosemary bush with the air of someone editing their will. You ask him what happened. He doesn't look up. They pulled the slaw beds. You blink. The what? He glances around, then whispers section by the wall. Cabbages, brined, buried. For winter. All gone. You wander back through the estate slightly unnerved. This is no longer about indigestion or fashion. This is a purge. You slip into the library where noble women pretend to read immoral pamphlets while actually gossiping in footnotes. One whispers that her cousin fainted after stepping near a cabbage cart. Another claims someone at court is building a leaf registry. They're joking. Probably. You pull a volume from the shelf. It's dusty, bound in cracked leather, and titled, On the Improper Virtues of Cold Greens. You crack it open and skim through pages that mix dietetics with theology like it's a casual hobby. There it is, cabbage, labeled as moist, cooling, rebellious. Not poison, but not trusted either. Cabbage, the writer warns, may cause the body to remember its peasant origins. You close the book. That's it, isn't it? It's not the vegetable, it's what it represents. A cabbage is not delicate, it's not rare. It doesn't arrive wrapped in gold leaf or transported by falcon. It grows in the dirt. It survives frost. It fills bellies without permission. And in a world obsessed with hierarchy, with lineage and lace, and 6 forks for 6 nearly identical puddings, that kind of resilience is dangerous. You wander back into the hall where a new dish is being served, something beige and jellied, quivering under its own self-esteem. A nobleman stabs it with the confidence of someone punishing emotional ambiguity. No greens today, he says cheerfully. None at all, replies another. And they laugh, though a few eyes flick toward the kitchen door as if they expect a cabbage to roll out on its own in protest. Historians still argue whether this cultural aversion was truly cabbage-specific or part of a larger disdain for all wet vegetables. Some say it was about class boundaries. Peasants had cabbages. Nobles had gilded starch. Others think it was health paranoia. Humoral balance was serious business after all. But there's one undeniable truth. The more they tried to erase it, the more cabbage loomed in the collective imagination. You sit near the fire that evening, pretending to read a book of sonnets when a steward enters with a tray. A covered bowl, no label. He places it gently in front of you, glancing once over his shoulder. No one's watching. You lift the lid. It's soup. Not just any soup. That green garlicky one from a few days ago. Still warm, still humble. Still full of forbidden comfort. He doesn't say anything. Just inclines his head ever so slightly. You eat quietly, spoon by spoon, as the fire crackles and the rain drums gently on the windows. And for the first time in days, your stomach feels settled. In the corner, a noble sneezes. Someone asks for more toast. Life continues. But beneath the tablecloths and the embroidery, something simmers. Not just soup. Tension. You realize that in this court of silk and surveillance, nothing is more subversive than enjoying what's not allowed. Especially when it comes in the shape of a leaf. You're summoned at sunrise. A page knocks with the apologetic expression of someone delivering a moldy pear. The royal physician, he mumbles, requests your presence in the apothecary chamber. You're not ill, at least not physically. But when a man with 4 honorary degrees in leechcraft wants a word, you go. Politely, in boots. The apothecary is tucked behind a gallery of hunting portraits, the kind where every deer has human eyes and every nobleman appears mildly unsure how swords work. Inside the chamber smells like cloves, vinegar, and quiet judgment. You find the physician hunched over a desk poring through scrolls with the intensity of someone searching for a reason not to mention cabbage. He looks up. Ah, he says you've eaten it, haven't you? You blink. He gestures dramatically. The leaf. You hesitate, then nod, just once. He sighs deeply as though you've admitted to reading poetry while barefoot. Cabbage, he says gravely, is the devil's taffeta. This is not a medical term you're familiar with. He begins pacing. In the Elizabethan era, health is dictated by the 4 humors blood phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Your body, according to this cheerful model, is basically a sack of squishy liquids trying very hard to stay in balance. Too much phlegm, you're sluggish. Too much bile, you're angry and possibly plotting against your neighbor. It's all extremely scientific. Cabbage, the physician explains, is cool and moist, which is deeply suspicious. Cool and moist, he says, unsettles the liver, dampens the spirit, and invites melancholy. He leans in. It stirs dreams. You're not sure what that means, but it sounds like something that should come with a warning label and a lute soundtrack. He rummages through a cabinet and pulls out a dried leaf pinned to a board. It's yellowed and curled like it's trying to flee its own reputation. This, he says, once caused a baron to believe he was a lighthouse for 3 days. You nod solemnly, naturally. Historians still argue whether these medical condemnations were rooted in genuine belief or just upper-class superstition disguised as science. It's likely both. After all, when your physician diagnoses you with spleen dissatisfaction, cabbage starts to feel like a risk. He hands you a small sachet of dried thyme. For balance, he says, burn it near the bed. If the dreams return, double the dose. You thank him, tucking the sachet into your pocket like a polite heretic. Back in the corridor, a maid is scrubbing the floor with more vinegar than necessary. She glances up. Was it about the leaf, she asks? You nod again. She sighs. They always think it's the cabbage, never the stress or the wine. Or the fact that half these lords sleep in ruffles. The mood around the estate is growing weirder. Not angry, not chaotic. Just nervous. As if the cabbage controversy has become less about vegetables and more about something deeper. Something knotted up in medicine class and the general unease of living in a world where your future might depend on whether the queen liked your bonnet. At lunch, the dishes are aggressively bland. Cold fish, warm milk, parsnips peeled into oblivion. Someone tries to bring up cabbage. A lord coughs into his goblet. Conversation swerves to fencing techniques and the possibility of rain. Later in the garden, you overhear 2 tutors debating cabbage's impact on the body. One insists it draws out ill vapors. The other says it encourages spontaneous poetry, which must be a symptom of cranial swelling. You slip past them and head toward the still room where the herbalist might still be hiding something fragrant. She is. Inside jars line the shelves. Some are labeled clearly lavender nettle comfrey. Others are more discreet. She sees you, says nothing, and hands you a cup of something steaming. It smells faintly of cabbage. Medicinal, she says. Balancing, don't tell the doctor. You sip. It's warm, earthy, calming. You feel your humors align, or at least stop arguing. She sits beside you. The nobles think cabbage makes you dream, she says softly. But dreams come from memory, not vegetables. You ask if she believes it causes melancholy. She laughs. No. Melancholy comes from wearing velvet in August and pretending to enjoy lute music. That night you burn the sachet of time just in case. The dreams don't come. But you lie awake thinking about how something as ordinary as a vegetable could make so many extraordinary people feel so threatened. Because cabbage doesn't fit the narrative. It doesn't obey the rules of elegance or digestibility. It grows too easily. It nourishes too much. It reminds the court, however subtly, that not everything worth eating comes wrapped in ceremony. And maybe that's the real danger, Dot. The rain hasn't let up. It clings to the windows in slow-moving rivers, streaking down the diamond-shaped panes like nature's attempt at weeping quietly. You sit by the fireplace in the east wing, listening to boots squelch past and nobles mutter about damp hems and untrustworthy clouds. But today the conversation shifts, because something happened at lunch. A salad. To most, that wouldn't be news. But at Elizabethan court, salad is code. It's a risk, a provocation. It's raw, wet, uncooked. And today's dish wasn't the usual handful of watercress or decorative sprigs. It was a shredded mix, pale green, purple-edged, dressed in oil and vinegar, served without warning. You weren't there, but you heard. Lady Elspeth took a bite, just one, and then she stopped speaking. Her spoon froze midair, her expression hovered between curiosity and alarm, and then, very gently, she fainted sideways into a decorative tapestry. The court went silent. A servant dropped a pitcher of rose water. Someone yelled, "Fetch the physician," even though he was already standing behind her chewing a pickled pear. She's fine, by the way. Back in her chambers, claiming to have dreamed of horses made of soup. Whether that was caused by cabbage or by the general stress of being 17, unmarried, and dressed like an ornamental footstool, no one can say. But the damage is done. The word is out. Slaw. It was slaw. Not just leaves, not just a salad, but actual shredded raw cabbage. And not hidden in a pie or disguised as garnish. Served openly, proudly, on a silver dish. Now everyone's panicking. Historians still argue whether this was a kitchen accident, an act of culinary sabotage, or the work of a rogue herbalist trying to make a point. Some even claim Lady Elspeth staged it. Her dramatic flair was widely documented, as were her 3 prior fashion-related faintings. But either way, it was a moment. The kind of moment that freezes time, that reshapes court behavior, that gets scribbled in margins of etiquette books under headings like raw mistakes. At supper that evening, the mood is tense. The usual roasted meats arrive. The fish is overcooked. The bread is somehow both dry and wet. But no greens. Not a leaf, not a sprig, not even a garnish. The table looks like a battlefield after the plant kingdom surrendered. You glance around, faces are drawn, palates are confused. Even the wine tastes unsure of itself. Then someone speaks. "I miss parsley," whispers a baroness. The room inhales sharply, and then like a dam giving way to polite rebellion, others join in. "I rather liked that garlic thing last week. I heard cabbage wards off plague. My physician says it calms the spleen." You watch it spread this strange little defiance. Soft, polite, and set in voices barely above teacup level. But it's there. A longing. A slow unraveling of culinary fear. You slip into the kitchen after the meal, curious to see how the cooks are handling this latest scandal. The staff is unusually quiet. The head cook paces like a general before battle. There are whispers about who made the salad. No one's claiming it. One scullery maid keeps looking at a knife block like it might give her answers. Someone's going to lose their position, the butcher mutters. Or their nose adds a baker not helpfully. You find a small saucer near the back, a leftover bit of the infamous slaw. It smells sharp and fresh with the kind of confidence usually reserved for Renaissance poets and feral cats. You try a bite? It's good. A little too vinegary maybe, but definitely alive. Crisp, defiant. It doesn't taste like rebellion, it tastes like honesty. And that perhaps is what scares them most. Because in a court of appearances, raw things are dangerous. They can't be masked by fire or cloaked in sauces. They hit the tongue and tell the truth. You wander back to your room carrying the taste with you. Outside, the rain softens into mist. The hall's quiet. A lute plays somewhere badly. And in that quiet space, you begin to understand the cabbage fear isn't about illness. It's about control. Because slaw doesn't kneel. It doesn't simmer gently or conform to shape. It crunches, it wakes, it resists. And when you're wrapped in lace and titles and endless protocol, resistance, especially in edible form, can be terrifying. Especially when it tastes like something you didn't know you missed. You rise early hoping for clarity, or maybe just toast. But the kitchens are locked, the main hall is empty, and the only sign of life is a single page sprinting down the corridor like he's late for his own beheading. You follow. It leads you to the garden wing where oddly the Queen's herbalist has been summoned for a private hearing. The last time that happened, someone was exiled for attempting to smuggle nutmeg in a locket. This time it's about cabbage. Or rather, it's about the woman growing it. Her name is Morwenna, and she's been quietly keeping the estate's stillroom for decades. She looks like the kind of woman who once scared a bear away from her thyme bush with nothing but a raised eyebrow. Her apron is always stained, her eyes sharp, and her garden lush, layered, and full of secrets. Today she stands before the Queen's Minor Advisory Council, which is exactly as pompous as it sounds. A semicircle of overfed nobles pretending to understand agriculture. At issue is a particular tonic she's been brewing, one made from herbs, root extracts, vinegar, and cabbage. Specifically raw cabbage aged in brine and laced with wild mustard. They call it slaw tonic. She calls it gut lace. Either way, it's earned a reputation not just for settling stomachs, but for causing curious dreams, and in one case, helping a baron finish his epic poem about rain. The nobles aren't amused. You've been administering this to staff, one asks, peering at a jar like it might bite him. To those who ask, Morwenna replies, and not just staff. A few of your lot, too. The council collectively bristles. I find it offensive, says Lord Henstridge, that a vegetable traditionally associated with peasants is being used in medicinal form within the Queen's own walls. She raises an eyebrow. Would you prefer I use imported cloves at 10 times the cost? There's silence. Historians still debate how much power these still-room women truly held. Officially, they were keepers of household remedies. Unofficially, they were chemists, midwives, and food revolutionaries. Many modern scholars believe they subtly shaped health practices beneath the veil of domesticity. You watch as Morwenna calmly opens her basket and removes several bottles. They're neatly labeled. Each bears a symbol rather than a name. She sets them down with care. This one's for sleep, she says. This one's for fever. This one clears the mind. And this, she holds up a cloudy jar, this is the one you fear. The liquid inside is pale green. It swirls slowly. It smells alive? Have you tasted it? She asks, looking each noble in the eye. They shake their heads predictably. I didn't think so, she says, turning toward the door. I'll be in the garden, with the plants. That work. And just like that, she's gone. The room buzzes afterward, of course. Half of the advisors are offended. The other half are intrigued, but too cowardly to say so. A scribe dutifully records the phrase, gut lace pending investigation. You find her later among the chamomile and bee balm. She's talking to a robin. It seems to be winning the debate. She notices you. You've tried it, she says. It's not a question. You nod. It helped. Of course it did, she says. Cabbage remembers. That's not exactly a scientific statement, but somehow it makes sense. You walk the rows with her for a while. The garden smells of mint and soil and effort. The cabbage patch is tucked in the far corner, half-shadowed like a secret that knows it's being watched. She tells you the plants aren't dangerous. What's dangerous is a court that fears anything unpolished, anything plain, anything with roots. Cabbage is a peasant's food, she says, and you know what peasants do. You shrug. They survive. You help her pick leaves for another batch. She lets you stir the brine. There's something soothing in the rhythm, the slow slice of the knife, the clink of the jar lid, the way it all smells sharp, honest. That evening, you sit near the fire with your own small bottle of gut lace. You don't drink it, just hold it, like a secret, like a promise. At dinner, the nobles are back to safe food, partridge, pudding. Something made of fish and flour and unspoken sadness. But you notice something. A little bundle of greens tucked under a roast. A flicker of red cabbage in the garnish. A noble reaching for a salad tongue and not recoiling. The tide is turning, not fast, not loud. But there, you sip your tonic. It burns gently. And in that moment, you realize cabbage didn't need to conquer the court. It just needed to survive it. You're starting to notice it more. Not cabbage itself, at least not openly, but the quiet rebellion. At first, it's subtle. A leaf here, a whisper there. A servant drying a slaw-stained cloth a little too quickly. A noble quietly requesting that one soup again, then pretending they didn't. But once you start looking, it's everywhere. And tonight you see it smuggled. The smuggling begins at supper. You're seated beside a nervous-looking young lord whose doublet is so stiff it might qualify as armor. He's sweating profusely for a man sitting indoors. Every few minutes, he shifts in his seat and glances at the footman near the door. Not the usual "my gravy is too tepid" sort of glances. These are anxious, conspiratorial, cabbage-adjacent looks. Then the footman nods, just once, almost imperceptible. A small parcel is slid under the table, and that, dear listener, is your first glimpse of underground slaw. You pretend not to notice, but your mind races. What's in the parcel? A wrap? A wedge? A wedge wrapped in something. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it's happening. Cabbage has gone black market? You wander the hall after dinner, drifting past tapestries and anxious whispers. In the servant wing, a group of maids gather by the hearth, passing something in a small jar between them. You catch a whiff. Tangy, spicy, mouth-watering. The moment they see you, they freeze. But you don't report them. You just nod. One of them relaxes and says it's the red kind. Less likely to be spotted. Clever. Historians still argue whether the so-called slaw smuggling network of 1590-91 actually existed, or whether it's a retrospective fiction romanticized by bored academics. Some believe it was exaggerated, a culinary version of telephone. Others suspect it was entirely real tiny acts of resistance, stitched together by cooks, herbalists, and well-fed risk-takers with too much time on their hands. The evidence mostly anecdotal. Memoirs, scribbled margins, and one suspicious painting that seems to depict a cabbage wearing a disguise. You trail your fingers along a wall sconce as you pass, thinking this is bigger than food now. This is performance. Because every smuggled slaw is more than a meal, it's a statement. A declaration that cabbage isn't just edible, it's essential, familiar, comforting in a world of rigid rituals and starched collars. You sneak into the kitchens later. The hearth is glowing low and the last of the evening's dishes are stacked high. The cook is there rolling dough and muttering about someone who over-ordered eels again. She sees you, wipes her hands, and jerks her head toward a covered pot near the coals. You lift the lid. Slaw, spicy, shiny, glorious. It's getting harder to hide, she says, but people want it. They ask. You raise an eyebrow. Nobles. She nods, quietly. Some. Others just hover near the larder and hope. You sit and she tells you stories. Of a baroness who keeps a jar hidden behind her embroidery silks. Of a steward who sprinkles cabbage in his soup, then acts surprised every time. Of a maid who claims cabbage cured her hiccups and now insists on eating it before every important errand. There's laughter, low, relieved, nervous laughter, and underneath it something else. Hope. Because the more they ban it, the more people crave it. Not just for the taste, but for the thrill. The court has become a stage and cabbage. It's the unexpected lead, humble, wrinkled, and weirdly defiant. The cook offers you a small jar. For travel, she says. You thank her and tuck it away. The next day you pass the Queen's falconer in the hallway. He smells faintly of brine. He winks. Doesn't say a word. Later you overhear two stable hands swapping recipes in code roses mean. Red cabbage snowdrops are onions and sunlight on stone is apparently garlic. It's absurd. And it's beautiful. Because in this rigid, rule-choked place, slaw is freedom. One forkful at a time. That evening, a nobleman invites you for a private supper. He's never spoken to you before, and his reputation includes the phrase briefly exiled for insulting a portrait, so you proceed with caution. The room is dim, the fire is high, and the food, all beige. Until dessert. He opens a silver cloche with a flourish and reveals a slaw tart. You blink. It's art, he whispers. Taste it. You do. It's sharp and sweet and somehow reminds you of childhood, even though you've never had anything like it. I had it in Paris, he says. They don't fear leaves there. And for a moment, the court melts away. There's just a table, a tart, two people sharing something no one else is supposed to enjoy. You don't speak of it afterward. You don't need to. Because cabbage is no longer about nourishment. It's about knowing. And you, dear listener, now know too much. It starts with a hedge. You're strolling through the manor's garden maze partly because someone mentioned strawberries near the south wall, and partly because you're avoiding yet another poetry reading on the moral virtue of damp weather. The hedges are tall, pruned to a strict geometry that only makes you want to misbehave slightly. Then you hear it. Not birds, not bees. Shouting. You follow the sound to a small clearing where two men in richly embroidered jerkins are facing off like angry ducks. One wields a gardening spade, the other clutches a trowel like a dagger. Both are flushed, panting, and visibly furious. You duck behind a rose bush. Trespassed into my furrows, the first man hisses. I did no such thing, the second retorts. Your cabbage was over the line. You blink. They're arguing about cabbage. Again. You emerge slowly, hoping not to get smacked by a turnip in crossfire. One of the men turns to you with a wild, accusatory glare. Tell him he says that planting kale on my property is an act of war? The other snorts. It's cabbage and it's my soil. Apparently, the boundary between their estates has always been a little vague, marked by a leaning willow and several passive-aggressive hedgerows. But now, thanks to a suspiciously thriving cabbage patch that grew too close to the imaginary line, it's escalated into a full-on noble dispute. You are briefly appointed mediator. It's an awkward 10 minutes. You suggest drawing a map. They propose a duel. With garden tools, you manage to de-escalate by recommending a shared harvest, which sounds wise, but mostly just gives them an excuse to glare at each other during dinner while pretending not to enjoy the soup. Back at the manor, the servants are buzzing. Did you hear the cabbage feud? Oh yes, over the root line. Next, they'll be fencing over fennel. The estate gardener rolls his eyes. You'd think they were arguing over silver, not vegetables. But this isn't just personal pettiness. It's property. And in Elizabethan England, land is everything. Owning land means power. Growing on it means productivity. And when what's growing is cabbage, a peasant's crop made desirable by scarcity and scandal, it becomes a matter of pride. You start hearing more of it. At supper, a viscount claims his cabbage smells more pious than his neighbor's. A baroness boasts that her greens are grown in imported Dutch compost. Even the kitchen is infected with territorial snobbery. One cook refers to Morwenna's herb plot as unseasoned squatter's turf. Historians still debate whether this wave of estate-based vegetable drama was widespread or confined to the more ridiculous fringes of nobility. But journals from the period suggest that kitchen gardens often became sites of both passive feuds and petty sabotage, like the case of Lord Pevensy's kale mysteriously turning yellow after his neighbor's pig accidentally wandered through. Or the widow who swore someone salted her soil to stop her red cabbage from outshining the earl's. You even catch wind of a formal complaint filed with the Queen's clerk over leaf trespass and culinary theft. It seems absurd, but it's very real. And as the noble class continues to ignore cabbage in public while quietly craving it in private gardens, become contested ground. A place where reputation and rutabaga meet. Morwenna, of course, finds this hilarious. They've ignored their gardens for years, she says, pruning a perfectly innocent-looking cabbage. Now one little patch of green and suddenly they're all farmers. She tells you of an earl who recently tried to buy her brining recipe for medicinal purposes. When she refused, he sent a poet to woo it out of her with couplets about fermented love. It didn't work. The poet now grows carrots and writes very sad limericks. You watch as she packs up her day's harvest, neatly labeled, carefully wrapped. A few leaves for a maid with morning sickness. A jar for the falconer's knee. A batch of slaw for the kitchens if they dare. As she works, the manor thrums with whispered drama. One lord has hired a fence builder to mark his true cabbage territory. Another now patrols his kale beds with a hawk. The Queen reportedly has issued no comment, though her latest garden portrait features very distinct lettuces in the background, which some interpret as a message of silent endorsement. You head to your chambers exhausted from your accidental career as a vegetable diplomat. On your windowsill, someone's left a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside, a tiny slaw tart, still warm, just a bite. There's a note, no name, just in green we trust. You smile. Because in a world where hedges mark social standing and compost can spark duels, cabbage has done the unthinkable. It's made people passionate, not about gold or glory, but about gardens. You wake to the sound of an argument echoing down the corridor, muffled sharp and spiced with words like indecent ferment and herbal sedition, which can only mean one thing: someone found a pickle. You wrap yourself in a blanket and shuffle toward the commotion, drawn not by curiosity, but by the low, irresistible hum of collective aristocratic panic. And sure enough, in the main dining room, several nobles are standing around a plate of cabbage. Not cooked, not raw, something in between. It glistens. It glows faintly in the morning light, and it smells sharp, sweet, a little sour, alive. Someone's made sauerkraut. Not the soggy mystery cabbage occasionally buried beneath beef, but the real thing, fermented, jarred, matured. You glance at the dish. It's nestled among the eggs and dry toast like a whisper of rebellion. Lord Wensley is losing his mind. This is treasonous, he declares, eyes bulging slightly. This is foreign. Technically, it's German, someone mutters helpfully. That doesn't help. Because if there's one thing Elizabethan nobles fear more than peasant food, it's continental peasant food. Especially food that doesn't follow the proper script of cook, serve, faint gently afterward. This cabbage has fermented. It has opinions. You watch a young lady poke it with the tip of her knife. It smells like vigor, she whispers, as if naming a sin. The steward tries to calm everyone down. It was delivered with the cheeses, he offers, perhaps an accident, a foreign shipment, not meant for mouths. But that's a lie, and you all know it. Because there in the corner, trying desperately to pretend she's part of the wallpaper, is Moll, one of the newer kitchen hands. And she's sweating. The nobles turn. "Did you bring this?" Lord Wensley asks. Moll freezes. Then, with the bravery known only to teenage rebels and people who've tasted real flavor, she nods. "Yes," she says. "It's slaw-aged with salt." Historians still argue whether sauerkraut's arrival in England was a top-down culinary exchange or a bottom-up sideways smuggle from merchant towns. What's agreed upon is that fermented cabbage caused ripples not just for its punchy taste, but because it lasted longer than anything should in a time without fridges or trust. And that, dear listener, is what unsettles these nobles more than anything. Longevity. Because cabbage that lingers doesn't fit into their tidy narratives of delicate perishability. You can't ignore it. You can't just let it rot quietly. It insists on existing, loudly, aromatically, defiantly. Lady Maud wrinkles her nose. This would make a fine foot wash, she says, which is not quite the insult she thinks it is. Another lord sniffs it again, then slowly takes a bite. The room holds its breath. He chews, he swallows, he smiles. This is, he says, carefully, unexpectedly bracing, like he just complimented a barbarian's table manners. Others begin tasting it, just tiny bites. Politely horrified, secretly delighted. You watch from the edge, biting back a grin. Because what's happening is something the court hasn't seen in ages. A shift. You catch up with Moll in the kitchen later. She's sitting on a flour sack, head in hands, convinced she's about to be fired, exiled, or worse, assigned to parsnip duty. But you bring her good news. They're asking for seconds. She stares. They what? You nod. Lord Picklehater called it bracing. That's basically a standing ovation. She laughs or cries. It's hard to tell. Probably both. You help her prepare more. The jars are lined along the shelf, each labeled with a cryptic mark: clove, pepper, wild garlic. She explains the timing. The burping of jars that don't open too early or it'll hiss at you rule. It's practically witchcraft. And yet, it's working. That evening, a new dish appears at dinner. Lamb roasted, bread dense, sauerkraut, optional. Except everyone tries it. Quietly. Carefully. One noble even requests a pairing suggestion. You suppress a laugh. Apparently we're doing sommelier cabbage now. You sit back sipping watered wine as the room slowly starts to shift. Palates wake up. Forks clink. A low buzz of conversation builds not about court gossip or fencing techniques, but flavor. Imagine that. One servant sneaks a smile your way and mouths gut lace wins. You nod. Because cabbage isn't just creeping back into the menu, it's taking its seat at the table. Fermented, fragrant, and utterly fearless dot. You pass through the estate's west wing the next morning and nearly trip over a crate. It's wooden, stamped with an unfamiliar crest, and smells faintly briny. Inside cabbages, rows of them, gleaming, confident, stacked like smug little green fortunes. You glance around, no one in sight, but the crate bears a tag. Lord Benedict Haversham Kitchen Wing Extension. Urgent. You blink. An extension. For cabbage, you follow the trail. Down the hall past the tapestry of St. Elfric regretting his life choices and into the lesser-known Haversham Chambers where a flurry of noise spills from a newly built annex. You peek through the door, and you find a miracle. Not a divine one, a culinary one. An entire cabbage kitchen. Lord Haversham, a lesser noble with a big ego and a tragic mustache, has apparently used his not insignificant wealth to construct a kitchen wing entirely devoted to cabbage. You watch from the shadows, stunned as cooks bustle around braziers, chopping boards, and peculiar jars. You catch phrases like ginger brined slaw and cabbage galette number 4. One man is buttering a leaf like it owes him money. And then there he is, Lord Haversham, standing in the middle like a proud parent at a vegetable graduation. He's wearing a robe embroidered with vines and the world's most serious expression. I shall make it respectable, he says to no one in particular. I shall reclaim the leaf. He's clearly lost his mind, but in a way that inspires awe. Because while the rest of the court dabbles in quiet rebellion and secret jars, Haversham has gone all in. Full public devotion, open experimentation, braised, fried, pickled, candied. There's even a sign-in sheet on the wall labeled Cabbage Testing Rhoda. Historians still argue whether Haversham's cabbage kitchen was born of genuine passion or an elaborate bid for social relevance. Some say he wanted to impress the queen. Others believe he simply had too many ideas and not enough restraint. You walk through the annex inspecting the stations. One cook hands you a cabbage fritter. It's crispy, spiced, slightly addictive. You nod. The cook beams. This one he says we call the Redemption. You find Lord Haversham later in the observatory sipping tea from a cup shaped like a lettuce. He waves you over and with surprising intensity begins his pitch. Cabbage, he says, is misunderstood. It has body, depth, chew. It's the Elizabethan truffle if you squint. You smile. He leans in. Do you know what the queen eats gelatin? Broth. Sad mutton. If she tried my roulade, he places a hand on his chest dramatically. She'd knight me on the spot. You're not sure knighthood works that way, but it's hard not to admire the ambition. That night, word spreads. The cabbage kitchen becomes the hottest secret in the estate. Nobles begin visiting under the guise of surveying tile work. Servants whisper of dishes so good they cause fainting the good kind. One cook swears a friar wept openly after trying a red cabbage tart with nutmeg. And slowly, slowly, the cabbage shame begins to fade. You see it in the way nobles start adding green to their plates. In the way conversation now includes the phrase surprisingly tender. In how no one flinches when a jar of pickled leaves is passed around. Lord Haversham even commissions a painting of his cabbage court, a dramatic tableau of him standing triumphant among cauldrons and copper pans, while a cabbage is elevated by cherubs in the background. The painting now hangs in his dining room, in a gilded frame. You visit again the next day. The kitchen is fuller now. More staff, more vegetables. There's talk of a winter slaw reserve and a braised cabbage feast to mark the solstice. You help a young cook arrange a platter of cabbage roses delicately steamed and brushed with clove butter. Will they eat it? He asks nervously. You glance out the window. A line of nobles waits in the courtyard, pretending to admire a pigeon while sneakily clutching tasting spoons. You nod. They will. Because Haversham has done the unthinkable. He's made cabbage fashionable. Not in hushed tones or under the table, but boldly architecturally. With flair, with menu cards. And as you leave the annex, passing crates and steam and soft chattering over seasonings, you realize something else. He didn't just build a kitchen. He built a future, one leaf at a time. You're dozing on a sun-warmed bench in the outer courtyard, half listening to the sounds of horses chewing thoughtfully, and noble women discussing shoe buckles like the fate of the nation depends on them. Then you hear it. Not hoofbeats, not gossip. Laughter. Quick, breathless, just slightly too loud for the setting. You open one eye and spot two kitchen maids leaning against a stone pillar, clutching each other in silent hysterics. One wipes her face with her apron. The other is holding, of all things, a cabbage carved into a crude but impressively detailed likeness of Lord Wensley. It's not just a joke. It's a message. Because by now, cabbage has grown beyond its roots, pun fully intended. It's not just food, it's comedy, commentary, a kind of courtly shorthand for subtle rebellion. You sit up intrigued. The day continues like usual falconry practice. No one enjoys embroidery circles that slowly spiral into arguments over which shade of green best represents despair, and a lecture from the Queen's tutor about the history of ink that somehow turns into a passionate debate over parchment margins. But underneath all of it, the Cabbage Whisper network is humming. There's a rhythm to it now. In the kitchens, in the stables, in the servant halls, you hear murmurs, giggles, code phrases like leafy lullabies and brine time. Even in the grand hall, the air feels lighter. At dinner, a small miracle occurs. A pie arrives, golden crust, fragrant steam. Inside, not just meat, but greens. A noble squints. Is that... The steward nods. Spring greens and herbs, lightly pickled. No one panics. No one faints. They eat it. They like it. And somewhere in the back, Moll grins into her apron. You catch Lord Haversham giving a subtle thumbs up from across the room. After dinner, you wander into the lesser gallery where the noble children pretend to read scrolls and definitely eavesdrop on adult arguments. There you overhear a cluster of servants whispering urgently. It's a game of gossip whispers passed from one to the next in a chain of increasingly questionable accuracy. Today's subject: someone in the Queen's own circle has been eating slaw at midnight. By the time the rumor reaches your end of the gallery, it's grown into, "The Queen demands slaw for her dreams." You raise an eyebrow. No one can confirm it. But no one denies it either. Historians still argue whether Queen Elizabeth herself ever truly joined the cabbage cause. There's no surviving order, no menu, no sonnet praising sauerkraut in her hand, but there are hints, stories, footnotes. A suspicious increase in vinegar orders to the royal pantry, a letter mentioning comforting jars, and most tellingly, the sudden reappearance of greens in official court menus in 1592. Coincidence? Unlikely. Back in the hall, the whispers continue. Someone claims Lady Brianna eats cabbage before dual swearing it sharpens the mind. Another says the falconer's new bird was trained using pickled leaf bits as reward. You smile, because the court, this stuffy, brittle, silk-drenched fortress, is starting to shift. Not loudly, not officially, but underneath. In laughter, in rumor, in games. You find a parchment tacked to a kitchen door later that night. It reads Leaf League meeting midnight, by the ovens, wear green. It's a joke, probably, but you show up anyway. There's no organized rebellion, no speeches, just a group of kitchen workers, gardeners, and one confused noble who claims to be doing a study, all sitting on sacks of flour and passing around jars of slaw. It's peaceful, silly, human. Someone starts telling stories the time cabbage was mistaken for a cursed artifact. The old superstition that red cabbage grows best when sung to at sunrise. Someone else claims cabbage can predict weather if sliced diagonally during a thunderstorm. No one believes it, but no one leaves. Because in a world of strict rules and controlled appearances, something as simple as shared laughter over fermented leaves becomes radical, revolutionary even. The fire crackles low, the slaw is gone, but the warmth remains. You walk back through the corridors past nobles pretending they haven't been eavesdropping, past tapestries that suddenly look like they're smiling. And you realize cabbage didn't just survive the scandal. It adapted. It amused. It connected people across rank, across fear. And now it whispers through the walls. In every giggle, every raised brow, every secret slice of green tucked beneath a roast, it says, "We're still here." You're woken far too early by the clang of silver against stone, which is never a comforting sound, unless you're dreaming of dinner service or sword fights, neither of which tragically is the case. As you groggily pull on your boots and trudge toward the source, the whisper reaches you before the details Lady Brianna's added again. You pick up speed. Down a narrow corridor around the corner of the tapestried alcove featuring Saint Dymphna fending off an owl, don't ask. And into the breakfast salon where chaos has decided to throw a brunch party. At the center of it, Lady Brianna. She stands like a painting that's been yanked off its nail, composed but somehow vibrating with a weird focused energy. In one hand a fork, in the other a lettuce knife. Yes, that's a real thing. Long, curved. Serrated along one side, polished like silver lightning, and apparently custom commissioned for delicate greens. Brianna is using it to attack a cabbage with the intensity of someone seeking vengeance on behalf of a salad. You ease closer. She's muttering under her breath. Something about slaw symmetry and honor among leaves. The cabbage is clearly losing the fight. Around her, the salon is silent. The nobles caught mid-meal or mid-mild insult are frozen in place, mugs half-raised eyebrows locked in elevated horror. Even the musicians have paused, one with his lute hanging limp like a stunned squirrel. A steward clears his throat. Milady, perhaps. She swings the knife a little too wide and slices clean through a breadbasket. I was assured, she declares, this was the appropriate tool. Technically, she's not wrong. Lettuce knives were once favored for avoiding bruising delicate greens, usually wooden or ceramic. Not bladed like a hunting saber, but hey, artistic license. Someone whispers she's been reading that French cook's journal again. Another adds I heard she dreams in vinaigrette. Historians still argue whether Lady Brianna's so-called leaf fervor was performance breakdown or passionate culinary reform. Her diaries are cryptic at best, filled with sketches of symmetrical salads and recipes annotated like battlefield tactics. One entry reads simply, "Slaw is structure. The blade is truth." Eventually, a footman braver than most gently offers her a more subdued utensil. She accepts it like a queen receiving a treaty. And just like that, the moment ends. The room exhales. Someone claps awkwardly. Possibly ironically, possibly not. You catch her eye as she strides past the knife, now holstered. Yes, she has a belt loop for it. She says nothing, but you could swear there's a glint of satisfaction behind the poise. Later, you find her in the south garden. She's kneeling in the dirt, trimming the edges of a row of herbs with delicate precision. You sit beside her, not speaking at first. Finally, she says they think it's madness. You shrug. You're slicing cabbage, not storming the armory. She smiles faintly, not yet. You ask why the knife. She doesn't answer right away. Instead, she hands you a leaf perfectly cut green veins like tiny rivers. It calms the mind, she says, which may be the first time cabbage has been called a mental health strategy. She tells you of her childhood in a gray house full of rules and stone walls. How the kitchen was always locked. How the garden became her escape. Cabbage grew, she says, when nothing else would. Even in bad soil, even in frost. You nod, because you felt it too, that stubborn, leafy resilience. The quiet message that something doesn't need to be flashy to survive. Or to matter. I slice, she says softly, so I don't break. You sit together in silence as the wind ruffles the leaves. By evening, the story has twisted its way through the estate. The knife becomes longer in retelling. The cabbage fiercer. Some claim she chopped through a silver goblet. One tale insists she used the lettuce knife to duel a skeptical viscount, though no one can quite agree on who won. You pass a group of courtiers debating whether to request their own lettuce knives. Purely decorative, one insists. Conversation starter, says another. Defense mechanism, mutters a third. The kitchens receive orders for smaller, more discreet blades. Morwenna shakes her head and mutters about how no one really understands the cabbage. But even she starts wrapping leaves a little tighter, slicing with just a bit more flair. That night, the supper menu includes a new dish. Thin ribbons of red and green cabbage, lightly spiced, arranged in precise swirls. It looks elegant. Next to it, a note inspired by Lady Briona's geometry. You smile into your spoon. Because today, in a court that prizes restraint, someone turned salad into spectacle and made everyone secretly want their own weaponized cutlery. The bell tolls softly through the valley, low and hollow as a breath through an empty jug. You follow the sound, feet crunching across frost-stiff grass as the path leads you away from the court's echo chamber of nobles and nervous salads. Today you're going to the monks. The Abbey of St. Rudyard is tucked into the hillside like a secret only the mountains were meant to find. You approach at dawn, the sun still rubbing sleep from its eyes, and the stone walls glow faintly in the chill. The air smells like thyme and beeswax. No one speaks. That's the first thing you notice. The second, the smoke curling from a chimney near the herb garden, straight and steady like a monk's prayer in physical form. You're met by Brother Osric. His smile is barely there, his robe is the color of warm porridge, and he gestures for you to follow with a nod. You do down narrow corridors carved from cool stone past candle-lit shrines and walls hung with drying rosemary. And there in the center of the abbey's cloister garden you see it, the cabbage patch. Modest, humble, neatly planted in rows between sage and chamomile. The soil here is dark and loyal, and beside it stands a long, soot-streaked structure with a tiny vent at the top, the time hut. You're about to ask when Brother Osric finally speaks. We keep time with rope. You blink. Rope. He nods. Soaked in beeswax, marked with knots. 1 knot burns per hour. He shows you the system. Each morning a fresh rope is lit. As it burns, each segment slowly blackens and curls. It's quiet, no tick, no talk. Just the whisper of flame and the gentle crackle of passing time. You watch it for a moment. It feels right. Time moving not in abrupt numbers, but in warmth and smoke and softness. We light the rope, he says, and we tend the leaves. Because here time and cabbage are bound together. Each hour a monk steps into the garden to observe, to water, to whisper if needed. They respond, Osric assures you, particularly to psalms. You don't ask how they know. You're not sure you want to. Instead, you walk the perimeter, noting the variety curly leaf red vein Savoy. All thriving, all obedient to the rhythm of the abbey. Slow meals, softer speech slaw only once a week. They ferment in the cellar, Osric adds, gesturing downward. In clay jars covered with cloth. We pray over them. You're fairly certain that's the holiest coleslaw on earth. Historians still debate how widespread monastic cabbage practices were, especially the more esoteric ones like blessing the brine or naming the leaves for saints. Some records hint at contests between abbeys over cabbage girth. Others mention entire sermons delivered on the metaphorical strength of the cabbage head. But here at St. Rudyard, it's not metaphor. It's lifestyle. You join the monks for their mid-morning meal, barley breadroot stew, and a modest bowl of fermented greens. The cabbage here isn't scandalous. It isn't secret. It's sacred, revered not just as sustenance, but as a symbol of balance, earthy and enduring. Brother Osric offers you a bite. It's astonishing, sour but warm, anchored, like something that remembers being wild but chose stillness. A younger monk hands you a tiny carved cabbage made from olive wood. For your pocket, he whispers, for courage. You accept it like a relic. After lunch, you help harvest. It's slow work, meditative. You move from plant to plant, brushing soil from roots, tucking leaves into woven baskets. The rope continues burning quietly in its hut. Someone begins humming a chant. The others join in. And the cabbage listens. You spend the afternoon in the scriptorium reading old texts about garden rotations and moon-grown vegetables. One entry warns of over-praying to lettuce. Another insists red cabbage is an omen of good fortune during fog. You sleep in a guest cell that night wrapped in wool and silence. No court, no cutlery duels, no gossip disguised as dinner. Just peace. And cabbage. You wake early before the bell and step outside. The sky is deep indigo. Mist hangs like breath. You pass the rope hut almost finished, just 1 knot left, and head to the garden. There's Brother Osric already tending the rows. He sees you, smiles gently. We planted extra, he says. There's word of shortages in the villages. Perhaps the court might follow. You nod. Because in this quiet patch of soil and smoke, you've found something the nobles haven't yet grasped. Cabbage doesn't just resist, it grounds, it listens. And sometimes, if the chant is right and the brine is strong, it becomes a kind of prayer dot. The dream starts with a goat. You don't know how else to describe it. One moment you're asleep, wrapped in a monk-spun blanket that smells faintly of thyme and beeswax, and the next a goat is staring at you. Direct eye contact, soul contact. Its eyes are luminous, its beard is suspiciously well-groomed, and it speaks in perfect courtly English. You must tell her, the goat says. You blink. Tell who what? The queen, it replies, chewing slowly. Tell her the cabbage is watching. And then you wake up, disoriented, sweating, and still somehow smelling goat breath. You dress quickly, shake off the remnants of cabbage hallucinations, and make your way back toward the court with that line echoing in your head. The cabbage is watching. By the time you arrive at the estate gates, things feel off. The guards are quieter than usual. A maid dashes past you holding what appears to be a notebook full of food sketches. And at breakfast, no one is eating. Not out of scandal, out of anticipation. Because something happened last night. Something big. And you hear it from the falconer first. The queen had a dream, he whispers, like he's sharing the apocalypse. She sent for every herbalist by sunrise. You widen your eyes just enough to be polite. She said, he continues, that the throne was made of cabbage. And the goat kept eating it. You stop chewing your bread. What goat? The goat with a bell collar, they say it spoke. You stare. You know that goat. By mid-morning, the queen has summoned her inner circle not to discuss foreign policy or tax levies, but dream analysis. You attend quietly, lurking by a tapestry. Her Majesty paces, regal, unnerved. I sat on my throne, she explains to the astrologer, and I could feel the crunch. Beneath me, soft, damp, cabbage. Purple, mostly. The astrologer nods solemnly, pretending this is perfectly normal. And then she says, voice hushed, the goat arrived. Named Reginald. Historians still debate the authenticity of Elizabeth's so-called cabbage throne vision. Some claim it was induced by poorly preserved trout. Others point to Morwenna's gut lace, which the queen may or may not have tasted during a secret midnight visit to the kitchen annex. Regardless, it happened. The queen dreamed of cabbage royalty. She gestures for a page to bring the drawing she commissioned after waking. It's childlike, surreal. The throne is unmistakably cabbage. The goat, grinning, wears spectacles and holds a scroll titled The Leaf Speaks. No one laughs. No one dares. The queen looks directly at you. You know plants, she says. What does it mean? You pause. Then say the only thing that feels both honest and survivable. It means, perhaps your Majesty, the leaf is speaking truth that's been ignored. She studies you for a long moment, then smiles. That afternoon, the castle shifts. The queen cancels a military meeting in favor of a private garden stroll. She asks to see the herb beds, the compost bins. She stops by the cabbage patch and kneels beside a red-veined head with a reverence usually reserved for saints. Morwenna joins her. They walk slowly side by side. No one hears their conversation, but afterward the queen orders 3 things. A new garden bed planted in her personal courtyard. A ceremonial fork carved from olive wood. A goat named Reginald brought to the estate. Yes, really. By evening, word of the vision spreads. Nobles start requesting throne salad out of sheer fashionable panic. The goat arrives the next day, flown in from Kent, wearing a custom velvet collar with tiny bells that jingle like sarcastic fairies. The queen insists on feeding him personally. Reginald becomes a court favorite within hours. He butts a bishop chews on the hem of a royal decree, and once sits squarely in Lord Henstridge's lap during supper. Everyone pretends it's charming, but under the absurdity, something deeper brews. Because if the Queen sharp, calculating, terrifyingly precise has given Cabbage her attention, then so must the court. Menus begin to shift. The word braised appears in gilded calligraphy. A poet pens ode to the crunch. The tapestry in the east corridor is subtly altered. Saint Elfric now holds a cabbage leaf in his left hand. You pass the kitchen that night and hear laughter music and the unmistakable pop of a fermenting jar opened too soon. And there tied to a post outside is Reginald. He gives you a look, as if to say, I warned you. You bow respectfully. Because in the end, whether by vision, rebellion, or one strangely prophetic goat, the Queen has turned. The leaf has won her over, and now the court begins to follow. There's a quiet knock at your door just before dawn. Not the panicked kind that means someone set fire to the soup again, and not the aggressive Lord Henstridge demands an apology for what you said about his goose kind. No, this is softer, rhythmic. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 1. You open the door. No one's there. But on the stone floor sits a parcel wrapped in rough linen bound with twine and smelling unmistakably of vinegar and hope. Inside a jar of slaw, a small wooden spoon and a slip of parchment with a symbol you now recognize. A curled green leaf sketched with careful reverence. You've been recruited. You tuck the jar beneath your cloak and follow the path described on the note through the garden gate behind the falcon roost and into the lower cellar. It's damp, cold, smells faintly of pickles and conspiracies. There's a candle burning in the far corner where 3 figures sit cross-legged on sacks of grain, whispering over a spread of scrolls and flavor pairings. One turns toward you and grins. Welcome, he says, to the couriers. It's not dramatic exactly, more cozy and slightly absurd. But still, you've joined the Cabbage Underground. The Slaw Couriers, as they call themselves, are an informal network part delivery service, part taste testing guild, part emotional support group for people who've cried over particularly beautiful fermentation bubbles. Their mission is simple. Get cabbage to those who need it. Quietly, creatively. Without alarming anyone who still believes lettuce should only appear in limp form beside bland fowl. They operate on code words and timing. A request for silk trim means a tangy red blend. Button polish is a garlicky green mix. The phrase "does the goat approve" is used to test loyalty. You try it out on your second night and get a nod of approval and a warm hand pie filled with curried slaw. It's possibly the best thing you've eaten since arriving at court. Historians still argue whether the slaw couriers were real or a late-invented romantic myth. Some believe they were kitchen staff and apprentice herbalists improvising survival strategies. Others claim they were as structured as the Queen's own guard, with routes, passwords, even uniform patches sewn into the hems of aprons. Whatever the truth, you're here now, and you're carrying cabbage. You're paired with a boy named Tomas for your first mission. He's small, fast, and claims to have once outrun a hawk after stealing an egg tart from the Duchess of Northwick. Tonight, you're smuggling slaw to the Dowager Lady Penful, who is bedridden and rumored to be emotionally allergic to broths. You creep through the service corridor, avoiding the squeaky tile ducking beneath wall sconces. Tomas carries the jar in a velvet pouch, muttering to it like it's a holy relic. You reach her door. Knock twice, pause, 1 knock. The maid lets you in. Inside, Lady Penful lies swaddled in 17 layers of lace and what appears to be sheer determination. Her eyes flutter open when she sees the jar. Bless the leaf, she whispers. You spoon a little onto a porcelain saucer. She eats, slowly, reverently. Then she sighs and falls asleep. Mission accomplished. The next night is trickier. Your target, Sir Elwyn, a notoriously grumpy noble who once declared onions the food of witches and has banned all fermented items from his kitchen. He's also allegedly addicted to Morwenna's garlic slaw. You bring it to him in a hollowed-out loaf of bread disguised as a midnight snack. When he opens it, he sniffs, glares, then devours it with the speed and shame of someone caught enjoying peasant food. He slips you a coin without a word. You add it to the courier fund a small pouch of tips, trinkets, and one intricately carved fork. Each night more requests come in. From the archery master, only red cabbage my aim improves. The laundress, for the night shifts keeps me awake. Even the lute player who claims it helps with stage fright. You're on your feet more often than not, navigating corridors and codes, memorizing who gets what and when. And you love it, because it's more than food now. It's connection. The couriers meet every few days to swap routes and stories. There's a growing map on the cellar wall dotted with pinholes and tiny scraps of cloth to mark safe delivery points. One night, Tomas adds a new symbol, a goat with wings. For Reginald, he says, Spirit of the Slaw. You all nod. You're in the middle of designing new containers, ones that don't clink, spill, or leak the unmistakable scent of cabbage funk, when a knock interrupts the meeting. This time it's Lord Haversham, in full robe, holding a tray of experimental slaw muffins. He doesn't say much, just places them down, nods and whispers, carry on. And then he's gone. The room is silent for a beat. Then someone says he's in. Someone else says we'll need bigger jars. You bite into a muffin. Savory, warm, just enough crunch. And as the candle flickers over your growing map of cabbage devotion, you realize you're no longer sneaking slaw into the court. You're feeding it. It comes without warning. One minute you're nibbling a slaw-stuffed tart in the east hallway while eavesdropping on a noble argument about sleeve lengths, and the next a herald bursts through the doors holding a scroll the length of your body and twice as self-important. The Queen has issued a proclamation, a real one, with seals, flourishes, and a gold ink signature that smells faintly of rosemary oil and fear. You gather with the others in the main hall. Nobles, courtiers, cooks, and even Reginald the goat are present. Though Reginald is more interested in a stray biscuit than matters of state. The herald clears his throat. By royal edict, he begins drawing out the syllables like a warm-up act for a morality play. Let it be known throughout this estate and lands beyond that the consumption, possession, or preparation of raw cabbage, fermented, salted, pickled, or otherwise unboiled, is hereby forbidden. The silence is thick. Punishable, he adds, by removal of kitchen privileges and temporary confinement in the embroidery annex. Gasps. Even the goat bleats in protest. It's the edict against slaw. You lock eyes with Tomas across the room. He looks like he's been told poetry is now illegal. A noble lady drops her vinaigrette spoon with a clatter that echoes like a funeral bell. The Queen's expression is unreadable. Cold, composed, not angry, but something sharper, strategic. You retreat to the kitchen wing with the others stunned. Morwenna paces like a caged hawk. She tasted the gut lace, she mutters. She liked it. Maybe it's a bluff, someone suggests. It's written in gold ink. Bluffing doesn't come in gold. The slaw couriers meet in secret that night, now shrouded in full rebellion. You lower your voices, adopt new code words, and hide your jars behind bundles of firewood. Someone smuggles slaw in a hollowed-out book of psalms. Someone else invents a boiling ritual where cabbage is technically boiled, then removed quickly and fermented anyway. Historians still argue whether the edict was genuine policy or simply political theater. Some claim it was a calculated distraction from rising noble tensions elsewhere. What better way to redirect attention than to outlaw the very thing they'd grown obsessed with? Others believe it was a power play, a way for the queen to reclaim control over a court that had quite literally gone to seed. Either way, the damage is done. Slaw goes underground. The slaw muffins vanish from the morning trays. The Leaf League disbands, at least publicly. Lord Haversham starts attending all his meals with an air of pointed culinary chastity, even as the smell of brine mysteriously wafts from beneath his robes. In protest, the kitchen staff stage a slow-cooking walkout. They prepare only boiled oats and unseasoned turnips. For days. The court is in mourning. You, meanwhile, are summoned to the Queen's private garden. You arrive to find her kneeling by a rosemary bush, snipping quietly. She gestures for you to sit. No more jars, she says. You say nothing. No more couriers. Still nothing. She turns. I had a dream, she admits. The throne rotted beneath me. The goat said I'd lost the plot. You nod cautiously. Perhaps she murmurs cabbage must return to the soil, not the table. You study her. The doubt is there. So is the fatigue. But beneath it all, something else, regret, calculation. No one ever really knows with queens. She stands. I expect obedience, she says softly, but I also expect creativity. She walks away trailing rosemary. You're left alone with the herb and the strange, almost invitation in her words. Back at the estate, the couriers rebrand. They're now the Boilers Guild. Every delivery comes with a spoon and the phrase for medicinal boiling only. Recipes adapt. Slaw becomes soup starter. Gutless gets renamed herbal porridge enhancer. One particularly daring cook creates a boiled, then chilled, then fennel-infused version called cabbage frost, which tastes like betrayal and smells like hope. Even Reginald gets involved. You rig a pouch beneath his collar to deliver slaw samples on silent hoof. No one suspects the goat. Well, no one except Lady Brianna, who begins sketching what she calls the Leaf Rebellion uniform. A cloak with cabbage embroidery, hidden pouches, and an optional detachable fork sheath. By moonlight, Morwenna tests a new brine mix under the kitchen floorboards. You help stir it, the salt stinging your fingers. Tomas sharpens pencils nearby, ready to label jars with names like not cabbage and definitely not slaw. The edict remains, but the leaf lives on. And now it whispers in new forms through tricks and tweaks and quiet culinary alchemy. Because cabbage, like the people who love it, can adapt, can disguise, can wait. And just beneath the surface of this silken, salted court, something is fermenting. You wake to smoke. Not the panicked building is burning kind. No, this smoke is gentle. Purposeful. It drifts through the corridor like a lazy spirit curling under doors and tugging at your nose with notes of clove oak and cabbage. You blink, sit up, sniff again. It smells like rebellion. You follow it down the back stairs past the tapestry of St. Radwin and his suspiciously shapely turnips until you reach the south wing. The air grows warmer with each step, and the scent thickens into something unmistakable. Someone is smoking cabbage. You reach the old banquet prep room, the one no one uses anymore because of the goose incident, and find the door ajar. Inside, a group of cooks huddle around a low, clay-lined oven. Above the glowing embers hang leaves curled, glistening, and slowly darkening in the fragrant smoke. A woman you've never seen before lifts one gently with iron tongs and blows on it like a lullaby. Taste, she says, and holds it out. You do. It's warm, tender, and infused with flavor you didn't know cabbage could hold earthy, spicy, almost like aged wood and secrets. She smiles. We call it ghost leaf. You raise an eyebrow, and this is legal. She shrugs. It's not raw. Ah, a loophole. Classic. She introduces herself as Marlin. No title, no noble house, just Marlin. She's been traveling the countryside learning old ways from farmers and forest dwellers, techniques forgotten by the court buried under gravy and suspicion. They used to smoke everything she tells you. Cabbage, sure. But also garlic beets, even bread crusts. You ask why? She grins. Because fire doesn't lie. It changes things without hiding them. That sticks with you. By nightfall, word has spread there's a new method in town, and it comes with heat. The couriers, still calling themselves the Boilers Guild on paper, reconvene in the north cellar, now repurposed as a smoke chamber. Tomas engineers a system of vents using broken flute pieces and chimney bricks. Morwenna consults old manuscripts for spice pairings. You're in charge of flavor trials. It's messy, beautifully so. You test everything. Applewood smoke lavender sprigs a near disastrous attempt involving cinnamon bark and regret. The cabbage transforms, absorbs, evolves. Smoked slaw, smoked paste, even smoked cabbage chips, which are so addictive that 2 footmen have to be physically removed from the test kitchen. Historians still argue whether smoking cabbage began as an intentional workaround or a culinary experiment that spiraled. Some point to records of blackened greens served at lower-tier banquets during the late 1500s. Others believe Marlin was a myth, a collective invention to explain the sudden uptick in flavor and defiance. Either way, it spreads. Fast. By the end of the week, nobles are requesting char-tinged leaves and ember-sweetened greens in hushed tones. They claim it's medicinal, stress-relieving, a digestion aid. Lady Brianna creates a line of scented handkerchiefs infused with ghost leaf vapor. They sell out before she even finishes sewing the prototypes. Lord Haversham commissions a portable smoker disguised as a prayer box. Even the Queen sends an anonymous note delivered via Reginald's collar, asking for a sample of the latest interpretation. You send her a tin of smoked cabbage crisps labeled for meditation use only. The tin returns empty, no notes. Just a small pressed cabbage leaf tucked inside like a reply. Things escalate. A secret menu appears in the lower kitchen. Only those with the right code phrase whispered by fire can order from it. It includes smoked slaw with honey lavender glaze, charred cabbage with pepper ash, ghost leaf stew with barley pearls. The nobles don't speak of it openly, but they show up with bright eyes and suspiciously smoky breath. Some take walks past the cellar door 3-4 times a night. One lord starts carrying a smoking spoon on his lapel for scent memory. But not everyone is pleased. You hear rumblings from the high table. There are rules, Lord Henstridge mutters. There were rules, someone corrects him. The Queen remains silent, observing, measuring, and still you smoke. Late into the night, you watch leaves curl and release their stories in soft tendrils. You sit beside Marlin, who tells you about traveling through Scotland, where people used to bury cabbage in peat to flavor it for winter. Some things, she says, get better when burned a little. You believe her. There's something in the process that feels honest. Cabbage has always been resilient, but now it's refined. Not hidden, not disguised, transformed. One evening, you bring a bowl of ghost leaf stew to the Queen's gardener. He's old half-deaf and usually smells of compost and despair. He tastes it, and for a moment he just closes his eyes. Reminds me of my mother, he says softly. She used to sing to the pot. You don't ask what song. Some memories are smoke-shaped, soft drifting, impossible to bottle. You leave him the rest of the bowl and walk back beneath the stars. The moonlight hits the smoke rising from the chimney, turning it silver. And you think maybe that goat had a point. The cabbage is watching. But maybe now it's also smiling. It starts with a painting. Not an official one, no golden frames, no careful brushstrokes of royal cheekbones. This is a wall painting tucked deep in the servant quarters behind a loose plank and surrounded by dust that looks older than regret. You find it while helping Tomas stash jars behind the firewood crates. He kicks the board by accident and it pops loose, revealing a hidden alcove. Inside cabbage. Not actual cabbage. A mural of it. Dozens of leaves sprawling and spiraling outward, painted in shades of green and gold with the detail of someone who's either very reverent or very bored. In the center, a single red cabbage haloed in copper leaf. Below it, a line of script. Faded, barely legible. From leaf we rise and to leaf we return. You and Tomas stare in silence for a full 30 seconds. Then he whispers, "Do you think we're in a cult?" You don't answer. Because honestly, it's starting to feel that way. The mural becomes your secret shrine. Not worshipped exactly, but visited. Studied. Understood. You tell Morwenna, who brings a jar of her oldest slaw and places it reverently in front of the painting like an offering. Someone adds a candle. Someone else leaves a cabbage rose carved from soap. Soon there's a ritual. Not mandatory, not formal, but steady. Every courier stops by the mural before a delivery. Touches the wall, whispers the phrase. It becomes a grounding thing, a reminder that this isn't just cabbage anymore. It's a movement, a philosophy, a way of seeing the world through layers. Meanwhile, above ground, the ghost leaf craze continues. The Queen's kitchen has quietly resumed preparing certain boiled greens with charred infusion. No one says slaw, but no one needs to. And then the music starts. You hear it first in the scullery, a hummed tune from a girl peeling turnips. Catchy, lyrical, haunting in the way only minor keys and winter ballads can be. Later you hear it in the laundry yard, then in the garden, then from the falconer whistling while bandaging his thumb. It spreads. A cabbage folk song. It has verses about growth and soil and brine, about burning leaves to see what truths remain, about rebellion and scent and the Queen's dreaming goat. You ask where it came from. No one knows. Some say it arrived on the wind. Others claim Reginald composed it. Historians still debate the origins of what came to be called the Ballad of the Leaf. Its earliest version appears scribbled in the margin of a cook's inventory sheet dated mid-1593. Later versions add harmonies, counter-melodies, and one entirely instrumental rendition performed on viol and kettle. You attend the first official performance entirely by accident. It's in the laundry courtyard. The moon is high, the air sharp. A group of servants gathers around a steaming wash tub. Someone strums a lute with a broken string, and then they sing. Softly, beautifully. O cabbage bold with briny heart, you thrive where others break apart. Though boiled and banned and called uncouth, you curl, you crack, you whisper truth. You feel something tighten in your chest. Not emotion, not quite. Maybe recognition. Because the court has spent months trying to deny cabbage, to tame it, to rename it. But now it sings. It echoes off stone and silk and reaches places rules can't. The queen hears it too. You know, because she appears the next night cloaked and quiet watching from a balcony. She says nothing, just listens. And then she does the most unexpected thing yet. She hums along, just for a moment, but long enough. After that, the song is everywhere. In the halls, the gardens hummed under breath during diplomacy. Children start skipping to it. A steward sets it to bells and rings it once an hour in the main corridor for morale. The ghost leaf jars start arriving with handwritten snippets of lyrics. And in the mural room, a new phrase appears below the cabbage. We are the leaf, and the leaf is many. No one admits to writing it, but you all know what it means. You're not just hiding anymore. You're growing. The court of cabbage, once a whisper, then a scandal, is now a culture, a rhythm, a flavor that lingers not just on the tongue, but in the way people speak. Laugh, share, defy. One night you sit beneath the mural with a bowl of hot smoked slaw and a candle burning low. You listen to the hum of footsteps above the faint echo of the ballad drifting through floorboards. You think about how it all began with fear, with shame, with pickles in the dark, and you smile. Because somewhere in all this mess of leaf and lore and laughter, you found something lasting, something nourishing, and it tastes like truth. The estate throws its first officially unofficial leaf banquet 3 nights later. It's not on the calendar. No herald announces it. There's no scroll, no trumpet, no summoned nobles. But you feel it the moment you wake up. There's electricity in the air, like the kind that creeps up your arms before a storm. Or the feeling you get when someone winks at you in the middle of a very serious prayer. In the courtyard, someone's sweeping up petals. In the hallway, cloth is being stitched in leafy patterns. The cooks are bustling like bees on borrowed time, and Morwenna is whispering curses over the spice rack like it personally betrayed her. You ask what's happening. She grins. We're feeding everyone, properly. You head to the kitchens and find a flurry of motion. Cabbages everywhere. Steamed, seared, braised, blistered, and basted. Ghost leaf crisps are layered between roasted squash. Red cabbage tarts line silver trays. Even the soup has been dyed a deep green and scented with coriander and lime. And in the center of it all, a cabbage cake. Layered like an onion in reverse, each tier alternating between savory and sweet. Frosted with whipped goat cheese and topped with edible gold leaf that shimmers under candlelight. Tomas helps you carry it to the ballroom, nearly collapsing under its grandeur. Who knew cabbage had this much drama, he mutters. You're not sure whether to laugh or curtsy. The nobles arrive slowly, uncertainly. No one announces the event, but they know. They know. The queen appears last dressed in midnight blue with subtle green embroidery curling up her sleeves like vines. At her side, Reginald the goat wearing a laurel crown and what might be a miniature velvet cape. The room falls silent. She looks around, then lifts her goblet. To the leaf she says, and just like that the banquet begins. There's no seating chart, no formal speeches, just food, laughter, music, and the occasional crunch that stops conversation in its tracks with how perfectly crisp it sounds. You make the rounds watching nobles unlearn their suspicion with every bite. Lord Henstridge cries actual tears over a smoked red cabbage and pear turnover. Lady Brianna hands out tiny napkin-printed poems she claims came to her in a slaw-induced trance. Even the archbishop is spotted devouring a cabbage croquette and then blessing it twice just to be sure. Historians still debate whether the leaf banquet was real or symbolic. Some call it the Night of the Green Moon. Others say it never happened, that the court invented it years later as an origin myth for their new cuisine. But you're here, you know the truth. Because you watch the queen take a bite of the cabbage cake, pause, and close her eyes. When she opens them, she smiles not at her advisors or the nobles or even Reginald. She smiles at you. The music swells. A string quartet in the corner has rewritten a madrigal to include a cabbage motif. The chorus is just the word leaf sung in increasingly dramatic vibrato. It's awful. It's magnificent. There's dancing. Not formal court dancing, but joyous, spinning, elbow-knocking celebration. Someone invents a move called the pickler. Someone else responds with the gut-lace waltz. You spend half the night refilling platters, the other half helping Tomas chase Reginald after he swipes a tray of crisps and makes a break for the garden. You catch your breath at the edge of the ballroom, leaning against a marble column and watching it all unfold. It's surreal. This once hostile court, so afraid of greens it nearly outlawed coleslaw, now embracing cabbage like it's the answer to every unsent love letter and every awkward silken dinner. And maybe it is. Maybe cabbage was never the villain. Maybe it was the invitation to flavor, to humility, to laughter. At midnight the candles dim, not out just low enough for the glow to soften the room into something secretive sacred. The queen stands once more. No speech. She just lifts a silver spoon, dips it into a shared pot of stew, and takes one final bite. Then she nods and leaves. No fireworks, no decree, just a gesture. But it's enough. The leaf banquet ends in silence, not from exhaustion, but from reverence. Everyone knows something has shifted. And though no one says it aloud, every single person there understands. Cabbage is no longer a joke. It's culture. It's identity. It's become a language. That night back in the kitchen, Morwenna locks the last empty jar into the storeroom and looks at you with teary eyes and a proud smirk. Well, she says that only took 17 recipes, 3 near poisonings, and 1 very persuasive goat. You laugh. Because she's right. The leaf has bloomed. And now it feeds more than bellies. It feeds belonging. The morning after the leaf banquet is quieter than expected. No hangovers, no panic. Just a peaceful cabbage-scented stillness. The kind of hush that hangs in the air after something sacred or ridiculous has occurred. You wander the halls in your softest shoes, and every footstep seems to echo like it's been granted ceremonial importance. The sun slants through stained glass windows, painting kaleidoscopic patterns over tapestries that for once aren't judging you. The nobles shuffle past like dreamers returning from pilgrimage. One nods solemnly and murmurs, "I'll never look at a braise the same way again." Another clutches a leaf-patterned handkerchief like it's a relic from a holy site. You slip into the kitchen expecting chaos. Instead, you find tea, steeped with red cabbage cinnamon bark and a sprig of rosemary. Someone hands you a cup before you can ask. It's warm, slightly sour, gently spiced, a hug disguised as hydration. Morwenna is already up flipping through a new recipe book with such intensity you'd think the pages owed her money. Tomas naps curled in a basket of clean linen. Reginald snores nearby wearing last night's velvet cape as a blanket. Everything is calm, but it won't stay that way. Because peace, you've learned, is just the inhale before history exclaims again. And this time it exclaims with a letter. Delivered at midday, heavy parchment, red seal. From the French court? The queen reads it over lunch, boiled egg soft bread, and a generous scoop of leftover slaw that no one dares question. Her brow arches, she smiles. She reads it again. Then she announces with the casual gravity of someone dropping a sword into a bowl of soup, "They've asked for our cabbage cake recipe." Silence. You could hear a pin drop or at least a gut lace fizz. The queen continues the French, curious about our culinary evolution. She sips her broth, then adds, "I believe this is what the poets call a moment of triumph." And it is. Because once mocked, once forbidden cabbage has now gone diplomatic. Historians still argue whether the French ever truly requested the recipe, or whether the queen fabricated the letter as a kind of morale booster. No copy of it survives. But soon after, foreign visitors begin arriving with suspicious interest in pickled greens and smoked slaw. An envoy from Florence asks for a guided tasting. A German count offers to trade his family's secret sauerkraut formula for a sample of ghost leaf powder. Even the Spanish ambassador, previously a fierce critic of anything boiled, asks for a second helping of cabbage custard and doesn't even flinch when Reginald headbutts him mid-sentence. You're pulled into high-stakes recipe development. Morwenna drafts export-safe versions of all the dishes lower in garlic, higher in poetic mystery. Thomas draws whimsical diagrams of fermenting pots for instructional flair. Lady Brianna volunteers to compose accompanying verse, although her first draft contains 5 uses of the phrase leaf lust and is quietly rejected. Soon the castle's eastern wing is converted into a culinary diplomacy suite. There are tasting tables, flavor wheels, spoons carved from 7 different woods, each allegedly enhancing a different cabbage note. You're assigned as a host. You wear a green sash with a copper pin shaped like, you guessed it, a cabbage leaf. It's technically not a uniform, but everyone starts wearing theirs anyway, even the queen. And so for weeks you serve. You explain. You smile as dukes and ambassadors sniff jars, nibble crisps, and murmur things like, "Ah, yes, I taste the melancholy, and is that ghost leaf très subversive." One day you host a delegation from the Low Countries. They bring their own mustard. You pair it with a pickled slaw on rye and accidentally spark what becomes known as the Flavor Accord of 1594, a 3-nation agreement on fermentation standards signed over a shared platter of cabbage-wrapped venison. It's never officially recognized by any government, but the court still commemorates it every year with a picnic. You return to your quarters late each night, clothes smelling of vinegar and victory dreams full of bubbling crocks and dancing cabbages in tiny diplomat wigs. And through it all, Reginald watches, still smug, still possibly magic, because now the very thing once feared, once banned, once whispered about in cellars and sung about in laundry courtyards, has become an instrument of empire. Cabbage fermented, smoked, sliced, and stewed is now your greatest export. The queen even commissions a new ship, painted green lined with brass and named the HMS Leaf. You laugh when you hear it. But later that night, standing on the parapet with a spoon of slaw in one hand and the wind in your hair, you think, maybe it fits. Because this has always been bigger than food. It's about voice, choice, and finding unexpected power in something that grows low to the ground but refuses to be trampled. You're stirring a vat of brine with a stick taller than Tomas when the queen's steward finds you. He doesn't speak, just hands over a scroll sealed with wax shaped like, yes, a cabbage leaf. The message is brief. Midnight, library, come hungry. You don't question it. By now you've learned that when the queen writes in vegetables, you obey. The castle is quiet when you arrive. Candles burn low in iron sconces, casting long shadows over shelves of parchment and dust. The library smells like old pages and time, and somewhere beneath that, vinegar. You follow the scent. Behind the tapestry of St. Elfrida's surprisingly muscular angels, there's a door. It creaks open to reveal a hidden room lit by soft blue lanterns and the gentle glow of a warming hearth. And there she is, the queen, wearing a robe that might actually be a repurposed tablecloth seated beside a long oak table covered in dishes. Not regal dishes, test plates. This, she says, gesturing to a steaming bowl, is what happens when you stew cabbage in rosewater. You sit, you eat. It's strange, floral, kind of like eating soup in the middle of a garden argument. I wanted to talk, she says. You nod, chew, wait. I dreamt of Reginald again. You raise an eyebrow. He wore a monocle, and he said the future of the kingdom depended on salad architecture. You try not to smile. She leans forward. This isn't about food anymore, is it? You pause. Then shake your head. It isn't. It's about how something so humble, so maligned, so quiet could ripple through a kingdom and shift its center of gravity. I think she says slowly that we need to make it official. You freeze. The court, she continues, needs a department. A formal branch, a cabbage commission perhaps? You cough mid-swallow. She's serious. And why not? You've already seen cabbage unite nobles, shift diplomacy, and inspire musical duels in the hallways, which, by the way, still happen every Wednesday. Imagine it, she says, eyes sparkling. A director of leaf development, an ambassador of slaw, educational leaflets, leaflets distributed to villages, recipes carved into stone. Cabbage laws, you murmur. Yes, she beams. Guidelines, seasonal slaw standards, fermentation protocols, leaf protection ordinances. Historians still argue whether the Cabbage Commission was a sincere bureaucratic endeavor or an elaborate inside joke that spiraled wildly out of control. Some say the Queen intended it as satire. Others believe she saw in cabbage the perfect metaphor for statecraft, layered, misunderstood, and endlessly adaptable. Either way, you're now drafting legislation for the Royal Leaf Charter. It starts with a preamble. In recognition of the cabbage, its culinary, cultural, and constitutional significance, and its resilience in the face of undue boiling, the scroll grows by the hour. You establish ranks, picklers, briners, choppers, smokers, tasters, each with its own seal and ceremonial ladle. There's a color-coded badge system, a rotating roster of flavor scouts, and a fermentation sabbatical for those on the brink of burnout. The charter includes emergency provisions for slaw shortages, official protocols for goat involvement, and a detailed schedule of seasonal festivals including brine-tide winters and marked by lanterns made of hollowed cabbages, leaf mass, a spring picnic where all foods must be hand-shredded, the pickle moon celebrated under full moonlight barefoot with communal tasting platters and competitive limericks. You even assign Reginald a title, official mascot of the Royal Leaf. He receives a small bell, a portrait in the gallery, and access to all vegetable stores. By the end of the week, the commission holds its first official meeting in the Great Hall. 47 attendees, 12 jars of sample slaw, 3 minor diplomatic incidents when 2 lords argue over the appropriate thickness of a cabbage ribbon. But overall success. The Queen attends the closing toast and raises her goblet high. To the leaf she declares and all its laws. Cheers erupt. You clink spoons with Morwenna, who's already planning next season's brine rotation. Tomas waves from the upper gallery holding a banner he embroidered himself. It reads, "One Kingdom under Cabbage." The queen smiles at you as the music swells. "You did this," she says softly. You shake your head. "No, we did." Because this wasn't one person's obsession. It was a revolution born in kitchens and corridors and whispered jars and smoky spoons. Carried by flavor, song goat, and stubborn joy, and now written into law. You step outside that night into crisp air wrapped in your green sash and breathe in the scent of frost and ferment. Above you the moon is full. Below it the kingdom dreams in layers. And somewhere in the distance Reginald bleats. As if in approval, you're awakened the next morning by a trumpet. Not the usual brassy herald blare that signals royal breakfast, or the flirtatious solo the lute player sometimes attempts outside Lady Briona's window. This one's different. It warbles, off-key, hesitant, like the instrument isn't quite sure it believes in itself. You roll out of bed, wrap yourself in your cabbage green sash, and head for the courtyard. There, standing atop a crate with a slightly crooked feather in his cap, is a young page announcing what he clearly believes is the biggest news since salt. Ahem. Her Majesty requests the creation of a royal cabbage anthem. Submissions are now open. All verses must be original. Bonus points for rhyme. No yodeling. You blink. Tomas appears beside you, eyes wide. "This is it," he whispers. "Our moment." You open your mouth to protest you've barely recovered from drafting fermentation bylaws, but it's too late. He's already sprinting back to his room, presumably to rhyme something with gut lace. By noon, the castle is a music conservatory. Every hall echoes with scribbled lyrics, humming nobles, and the occasional dramatic lute strum from behind velvet drapes. Someone even tries a cabbage rap. It's brave. You, meanwhile, are cornered by Lady Brianna, who insists you co-write a ballad titled "The Leaf That Loved Too Much." It includes 4 tragic verses, 2 key changes, and a goat solo. You suggest cutting the key changes. She counters by adding a flute. Historians still debate the quality of the resulting anthem, but its popularity was unquestioned. Records from the time refer to a week-long leaf sing in which courtiers performed their entries nightly. The winner, a madrigal titled "Hail the Humble Leaf," composed by a baker's apprentice with a truly haunting tenor. The queen weeps openly at the final verse. And with that, the royal cabbage anthem becomes official, engraved on copper plates, taught to children, whistled by guards on night patrol. Morwenna even sets it to fermentation rhythm, singing it aloud while stirring her jars. It helps the bacteria bloom, she insists, completely serious. The next proclamation comes just 3 days later. Not from the Queen this time, from Parliament. A letter delivered with much ceremony addressed not to Her Majesty but to you. You open it with trembling hands and cabbage-smudged fingers. It reads, "In light of your service to culinary innovation, diplomatic flavorcraft, and the preservation of slawly tradition, we invite you to present your findings before the Council." In other words, a speech. Before Parliament. You sit down. Hard. Morwenna pats your shoulder. "Wear your second-best robe," she says. The good one screams "pickle merchant." Tomas tries to coach you on delivery. Project your voice, but not like a goose. Think noble, not honking. You practice in front of the mural room, hoping the cabbage saints are listening. Your speech is scheduled for the next full moon. Because of course it is. You travel by carriage, accompanied by 2 kitchen aides. Reginald dressed in a ceremonial blanket and a single smoked cabbage preserved in oil as a visual aid. The council chambers are grander than you imagined. Stone arches, gilded sconces, A floor mosaic shaped like the kingdom's original crop calendar? You stand in the center of it all, throat dry, knees politely trembling. And then you speak. You begin with flavor, with the first bite of brined slaw that changed your understanding of joy. You speak of rebellion, of the mural, of the Queen's vision and Reginald's wisdom and how fear of a vegetable nearly unraveled the cord. You speak of resilience, of how cabbage-like people grows best when tended with care, fermented with patience, and shared with laughter. And finally, you present the royal leaf doctrine, a proposal to incorporate cabbage education into local schools, establish a traveling fermentation caravan, and fund further research into smoke techniques and goat-based diplomacy. You finish. Silence. Then applause. Long, echoing. Parliament agrees unanimously to support the Leaf Initiative. You're given a scroll. A title. Official Leaf Envoy. You ride home that night under stars that seem to nod their approval. Reginald curls beside you snoring softly. The smoked cabbage rests in your lap, catching moonlight in its oil. And when you return to court, the Queen meets you at the gate. She says nothing, just hands you a spoon, a small one carved from walnut. And in the silence that follows, you understand this is how nations change. Not with force, but with flavor. You're barely back from Parliament before the next twist unfurls like a cabbage leaf hiding something spicy underneath. A messenger arrives on horseback, mud-splattered and wild-eyed, holding a single item in his gloved hand. A small jar. No label. Just a wax seal pressed not with a royal emblem or a family crest, but something stranger. A spoon crossed with a feather. The Queen calls an emergency tasting council. Not the full court, just the inner circle you. Morwenna Thomas, Lady Brianna, and Reginald, whose attendance is now non-negotiable, though his tasting notes mostly consist of chewing loudly and making pointed eye contact. You gather in the tasting chamber, formerly the broom closet, now upgraded with sconces, and an embroidered leaf sweet banner, and crack the jar open. The smell hits you like a whisper and a slap. Garlic clove, something tangy but not vinegary. Warm but not cooked. Mysterious, confident, possibly smug. Tomas sniffs. That smells like it knows things. Morwenna stirs the slaw gently, then places a spoonful on a slice of toasted oatcake. You all try it together. It is... You can't even finish the sentence. It's incredible. Rich balance, subtly smoky, with a finish that tastes like autumn wind and justified rebellion. It has layers like regret in a sonnet. It's slaw that sings in 5-part harmony. You lean back in your chair, stunned. Who made this, the Queen asks. The steward steps forward. A monastery, he says, far north, Benedictine. They've sent no name, just a message. He hands you a note. For the Leaf Envoy, the sacred brine endures. Everyone freezes. You've heard rumors. Whispers of monastic slaw fermented in silence, perfected over centuries, seasoned with prayer and regional myths. Cloistered chefs sworn to secrecy. Recipes passed hand to hand beneath stained glass and moonlight. Historians still argue if such monasteries truly specialized in slaw, or if this is just one of those deliciously persistent folk fantasies. But this jar, this flavor proves something. They're real, and they're watching. You spend the next week organizing a diplomatic journey to the north. The Queen insists on full ceremonial gear. You compromise at a formal sash and a travel-sized tasting spoon on a chain around your neck. Morwenna packs gifts, dried gut-lace scrolls, pickled garlic pearls, a smoked cabbage medallion. Reginald packs himself into your cart. You don't argue. The journey takes 6 days. You cross foggy moors, stone bridges, forests that hum with brine-scented wind. You arrive at the monastery gate under a sky the color of beetroot and silence. A monk answers. He doesn't speak, just nods. He leads you inside. The monastery is quiet. Cold stone, soft steps. But every corridor carries the scent of something fermenting, a rich, earthy tang that suggests devotion, patience, and the occasional clove emergency. You're led to a chamber lit by oil lamps, a long wooden table, atop it 8 jars. The monk gestures. You begin tasting. Each slaw is a revelation. One is tart and spiced, invoking lemon and longing. Another is deep and umami-rich, like a hug from an ancestor you never met. One tastes of thunder, one of first snowfall, each made from cabbage, but more than cabbage. From time, silence, care, and something else, a sense of purpose so quiet it doesn't even need to announce itself. After the 8th spoonful, the monk finally speaks. You understand now, he says. Slaw is memory, preserved. You nod. He hands you a scroll sealed with wax and dried marjoram. It contains what he calls the monastic 4 guiding principles for sacred fermentation: salt with humility, wait without doubt, taste with wonder, share with reverence. You commit them to memory. On your last day, the monks perform a ceremony. A slow stirring of a new jar, each person adding a pinch of spice or herb from a pouch worn at the waist. You're invited to stir last. The broth ripples under your hand like it's breathing. The monk bows. This jar, he says, is yours to carry for what comes next. You leave the monastery with the sacred slaw secured in velvet, and a silence in your heart that feels less like emptiness and more like a perfectly timed pause in a ballad. When you return to court, the queen welcomes you with a nod and a spoon. You open the jar. The scent unfurls. The court stills. And from that moment on, the sacred brine becomes part of everything served at state dinners, gifted to visiting dignitaries, even used sparingly in the queen's morning porridge. It's more than flavor. It's foundation. Proof that even the quietest things, when nurtured, when respected, can carry the weight of legacy. And as you watch Tomas teach a new apprentice the 4 principles and Morwenna hum the anthem, while labeling jars and Reginald nap contentedly beneath the mural room, you realize you've found the heart of it. Not just the court's transformation, but your own. You're in the south garden watching a cabbage unfurl in real time. Its green leaves slowly stretching under the late spring sun like a noble waking from a very flattering nap when Lady Brianna approaches with a satchel and a look. Not just any look. The look that means she's either written a new play or invented a cabbage-based calendar system. It's the play. I've written a drama, she says, breathless. 5 acts, tragic, poetic, starring the leaf. You raise an eyebrow. The cabbage is the protagonist. No, 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 she says, the cabbage is the metaphor. Ah, naturally. She explains as you walk back to the main hall. It's a court intrigue piece, obviously. A queen torn between duty and flavor. A loyal servant fermenting secrets in the shadows. A ghost goat who delivers prophecies through interpretive dance. You can already guess who inspired that last part. The queen agrees to a private reading. A select audience gathers in the mural room, now doubling as the kingdom's most elite playhouse. There's hushed excitement and a surprising amount of cheese. Tomas plays the loyal servant. Morwenna plays the conflicted queen. Reginald, after much coaxing, reluctantly dons a shimmery cape and headbutts the stage on cue. It's a triumph. Laughter, tears, At one point, someone faints from emotional resonance or possibly from sniffing too much rose-pickled slaw. The queen stands at the end, claps once, and declares it necessary theater. She commissions a second performance, this time public. The court scrambles into action. Costumes are upgraded, a set is constructed in the Rose Courtyard, extra slaw is prepared, it becomes the event of the season. Invitations are etched into cabbage leaves and hand-delivered in chilled boxes. On opening night, hundreds gather. Nobles, diplomats, farmers from 3 villages over. The queen herself opens the show with a brief statement. Let the leaf speak. The audience is rapt. Tomas delivers a monologue about flavor and betrayal that earns spontaneous sobs. Morwenna's soliloquy on fermentation and forgiveness brings the Duchess of Wexley to her knees. Reginald naps through most of it, but does wake up to trample a prop barrel at exactly the right moment. Historians still debate the play's cultural impact. Some call it the turning point of the edible renaissance. Others insist it was a cabbage-fueled fever dream best left in the archives. But no one forgets it. The next morning, you're flooded with requests for scripts. Copyists scramble to replicate the manuscript before it wilts. Brianna insists on cabbage paper, it's a whole thing. Soon, traveling troupes are performing the drama in village squares and city stages alike. And with that, Leaf Theater is born. Soon it multiplies. A musical parody appears within the month. Leave Me Alone, a Gutlace Review. Followed by a puppet show, The Little Pickle Who Could. Even a children's morality tale, Sir Slaw-a-Lot and the Brine of Destiny. The kingdom has gone full cabbage culture. Slaw salons open in the city. Debate clubs hold cabbage tastings before arguing topics like, was the leaf movement? More aesthetic or political? A new academic field emerges at the Royal College Cabbage Studies. Its first professor wears a cloak embroidered with spoon patterns and speaks only in pickling metaphors. You're invited to give the opening lecture. You try to be serious, scholarly. But halfway through your prepared remarks, a student asks, how did it feel when the queen lifted the spoon that first time? And you forget the speech entirely. You just tell the story, not as history, as experience, as something lived, felt, tasted. By the end, the entire class is humming the Royal Cabbage Anthem under their breath. You leave with a full heart and a pocket full of syllabi. The queen calls for a celebration. Not a banquet this time. A festival. The Festival of the First Leaf. It's to be held every spring, marking the moment cabbage first appeared on court menus with dignity. You help plan it. Parades, puppet shows, tasting booths with global slaw variations, children in cabbage crowns, teens in rebellious anti-turnip shirts, goat races, the main event. A reenactment of the first illegal jar delivery, complete with dramatic lighting and a papier-mâché secret hallway. The queen herself judges the leaf-carving competition. Reginald eats 3 entries and is disqualified as a juror. The festival lasts 3 days. 3 glorious brine-soaked days filled with dancing laughter, memory, and renewal. And on the final night, as lanterns glow from every balcony, you stand beside the queen at the highest tower. She clinks her spoon against yours. We did it, she says. You nod. We started with cabbage, you reply, and ended with a culture. She smiles. But we're not ending. And she's right. The leaf keeps growing. You wake before dawn, drawn from sleep by a whisper of a breeze that smells faintly of sage and old parchment. The castle is still for once. No pickling chants, no midnight jam sessions. Just the creak of beams and the distant snore of someone dreaming of brine. You wander soft-footed through the halls down past the great tapestries beyond the kitchen with its quietly snoozing hearth until you reach the West Tower. The door is ajar. Inside sits the Queen, alone, by the window, staring at the horizon where the first light slips across the land like melted gold on cabbage leaf veins. She hears you and gestures you in. Come, she says, the kingdom is stirring. You sit beside her. For a long while, neither of you speaks. You sip warm slaw tea, thankfully not the rosewater kind, and watch the sky grow paler. Finally, she says they sent word from the north. You raise an eyebrow. The monk, she clarifies, they've finished the sacred ferment. Your heart does something strange, like it's about to sing a sea shanty or cry happy tears into a vat of gut lace. They call it memory of the root. You smile, because of course they do. You've tasted their slaw before. You know the gravity of this. They're sending a single jar, the Queen continues. One jar only, for the nation. You blink. What are we supposed to do with it? Display it under glass. Eat it and ascend to cabbage heaven. The Queen chuckles. No, we'll listen to it. That stops you. She explains the monks believe fermented cabbage captures not just flavor but feeling. That, given the right tools, one can read it the way you read old letters. A journal in brine. You stare at her stunned and intrigued, because you've heard stranger things. Remember the goat dream? Right! Later that day, the jar arrives hand-delivered by a monk wearing robes dyed with beet and coal ash. He says nothing, just bows, sets the jar on a velvet pedestal, and leaves. The court gathers to watch you and Morwenna crack the seal. You sniff, and it happens. You feel it. Memory. Not your own, but someone's. A farm. Wine through barley. Hands kneading spice into cabbage with aching knuckles. A child's laugh. The smell of snow about to fall. It hits everyone differently. Tomas begins humming an unfamiliar lullaby. Lady Brianna writes a poem in 5 minutes, eyes glassy. The Queen places one hand on the glass and closes her eyes for a full hour. No one dares interrupt. Historians still argue whether the memory of the root jar was actually enchanted, or simply so perfectly seasoned that it unlocked human nostalgia. Some think it contained spices long lost. Others call it mass suggestion. But the court knows better, because over the following days the jar changes people. They walk slower, speak softer, forgive more. Even the kitchen maids, usually feisty during cleanup, begin singing harmonies from the cabbage anthem without sarcasm. It inspires a new project, the Memory Vault, a wing of the castle dedicated to emotional preservation through food. You lead it, with Morwenna as archivist, Tomas as curator, and Reginald as well. Reginald. He mostly chews table legs, but morale improves, so you let it go. You begin collecting slaws from every region, each jar annotated with the recipe, the hand that made it, and a note on the feeling it carries. Joy, longing, reconciliation, courage, the occasional spicy regret. Soon visitors arrive from across the realm, not for feasts, but to remember. They sit in the vault, open a jar, and breathe. It becomes a pilgrimage of sorts. Even the skeptical nobles begin to believe. Lady Wexley, who once insisted cabbage was a peasant's perfume, now requests a spoon of contentment with her tea. Lord Henstridge writes a stirring essay titled Brined Epiphanies, My Journey from Scorn to Slaw. The Queen composes a decree, let all who hunger find flavor. Let all who remember find peace. Let all who ferment do so with dignity. It's carved into the stone above the vault entrance. You often go there at dusk, with a spoon, with silence, with gratitude. because the leaf that once caused fear now fosters reflection. And you've gone from secret courier to keeper of cabbage memory? Not bad, really. Sometimes you walk the gardens and remember the early days, the jars hidden behind bricks, the whispered deliveries, the panic when Reginald ate an entire batch of lavender slaw and headbutted a bishop. You laugh, you hum the anthem, and you wait for the next delivery. Because cabbage, you now understand, isn't just a vegetable, it's a vessel, a time capsule, a conversation with the past seasoned, sealed and ready to be shared. The summer heat arrives like a royal decree, sudden, loud, and determined to make everyone sweat in the most undignified ways. You fan yourself with a cabbage leaf hand fan, surprisingly effective, while Morwenna experiments with sun-fermented slaw, a new method involving jars placed on mirrored tiles beneath magnifying lenses. It's part science, part art, and mostly a good excuse to squint dramatically at thermometers while sipping chilled gut-lace fizz. Meanwhile, the court begins preparation for an unprecedented event, the International Leaf Summit. Yes, you read that correctly. Diplomats and culinary scholars from across Europe and a few very enthusiastic messengers from Persia and the Ottoman court have requested attendance. Their goal: to witness, share, and debate the philosophy, practice, and future of cabbage. The Queen calls it the Great Leafening. The steward just sighs deeply and orders more chairs. Your job: host, naturally. With your new title as Leaf Envoy, it falls to you to organize the events, curate the tasting menus, and ensure no one tries to ferment anything in the moat again. Looking at you, Tomas, you set up 7 stations across the castle grounds. Brine and Dine, featuring international slaws served with stories by the chefs who made them. Fermentology Lab, a display of experimental techniques including Morwenna's infamous whistling jar that makes unsettling melodic sounds. Diplomunch, a tent for political discussion over pickled platters. Goat Track, a race course. It's Reginald's idea. He demands a velvet starting flag. Leaf lore story circles where elders and monks share cabbage-related myths. Cabaret open mic leaf poetry. Lady Brianna hosts in a hat shaped like a salad bowl. The Jar of Echoes, a sacred space where one might whisper into an empty jar, seal it, and place it in the memory vault. You're especially proud of that last one. The opening day begins with a procession. Ambassadors march holding their national flags and corresponding brass ladles. The Queen leads in her ceremonial robe stitched with over 3000 embroidered cabbages. Reginald trots beside her in golden hoof slippers. You follow, wearing the sash of fermentation freshly pressed. The crowd erupts. The anthem plays. Someone releases green paper butterflies from the balcony. It's a spectacle. And then, the real work begins. You navigate between panels like a seasoned diplomat, mediating heated debates about coriander ratios, explaining ghost leaf sourcing, and managing a near duel between 2 Swiss picklers over optimal shred thickness. You meet a scholar from Byzantium who carries an amulet filled with ancient sauerkraut. A Syrian chef teaches you a slaw made with pomegranate and mint that makes your toes curl with delight. A Dutch philosopher insists cabbage reflects the structure of moral logic. You nod like that makes sense. There are speeches, dances, a brief emotional interpretive performance titled The Leaf Remembers. Someone tries to ferment a melon. It explodes. No one is harmed. Everyone applauds anyway. And through it all, you keep moving. Tasting, listening, facilitating. You've never been this exhausted or this proud. Because this strange, beautiful, slightly vinegary gathering is proof. Cabbage has gone global. Historians still argue whether the International Leaf Summit produced any lasting policy. The minutes, after all, are partially written in rhyme, and one page is stained with beat slaw beyond legibility. But what no one disputes is its impact on people. Bonds form. Recipes swap hands like precious gifts. One delegation proposes a cross-cultural slaw treaty pledging peaceful exchange of techniques and ingredients for the next century. The Queen signs it with a flourish and a wink. At the closing ceremony, you stand beside her on the balcony. The crowd quiets. She lifts her goblet. Let it be known she declares that from this day forward the court shall not merely be a place of rule and ritual, but also of leaf and laughter. The anthem plays one last time. Everyone sings, even the goat. That night you wander the quieted grounds lantern in hand. You pass empty tasting booths, jars glowing faintly under moonlight, laughter still echoing in the stones. You reach the jar of echoes. There's a small queue. People waiting to whisper their memories, their wishes, their thanks. You add yours. Not a speech. Just 3 words. Thank you, cabbage. You seal the lid. Place it on the shelf. And walk away knowing that what you've helped build is more than tradition, more than cuisine, more than the sum of vinegar and salt. It's a home, made of leaf and love. The next morning, after the final cleanup, carts rumble away and the courtyard returns to its natural rhythm of goat hooves and mild gossip. You find yourself standing beneath the mural in the library again. You haven't been here in a while. The painting's still the same vibrant greens, gold-veined leaves, that slightly judgmental carrot in the lower corner, but it feels different now. Not secret, not forbidden, just foundational, like an old root that fed everything above without asking for thanks. You run your hand along the lower frame. Dusty, familiar, safe. Then you hear footsteps. It's the Queen. No robe this time, no crown. Just simple wool and soft boots, like she's stepped out of the past and into a walk through memory. She joins you in silence. Then I think it's time. You glance at her. Time for what? She nods at the mural. For us to open the archive. Ah, the archive. The whispered of chamber said to contain the oldest recipes, the earliest cabbage drawings, the first ever recorded fermentation journal, written allegedly in beet ink and goat hide. Historians still argue whether the archive was a physical space or metaphorical, a representation of cultural knowledge preserved in practice, not parchment. But here now, you're about to find out. You press gently on the mosaic tile shaped like a radish. It clicks. A panel slides open. Behind it, a stone staircase winding down into darkness. The Queen lights a lantern. You descend. It smells of time and thyme, of paper and pickling spice. You reach the bottom and the air is cooler. Still, like it's been holding its breath since the last visitor left. Shelves line the walls, stone, not wood. On them, jars, scrolls, wooden spoons, blackened with age, scraps of cloth, printed with faint instructions in hand stitching. There's even a cabbage crown, dried pressed, mounted in a glass box. The first ever given, perhaps, or the last one saved. You step carefully between display cases. You pass a ledger titled Slaw for Peace Treaties and Pickle, a brittle parchment covered in diagrams of fermentation vessels, including one that looks suspiciously like Reginald, a clay tablet labeled First Recorded Brine Ratio. Subject to taste, the Queen opens a chest, Inside, dozens of folded letters written in dozens of hands over dozens of years. They're not addressed to monarchs. They're addressed to Cabbage. You read a few. Thank you for comforting me when the stew burned. I thought I couldn't do anything right, and then the slaw jar fizzed just like it was supposed to. You made me feel proud again. You fold one back into its envelope. You see, the Queen says it was never about forcing a vegetable onto anyone's plate. You look up at her. It was about reminding them that transformation is possible, that what once was feared could become beloved. That bitterness with time and salt can become something delicious. You take it in and realize she's not just talking about cabbage anymore. That night, you gather a small group in the archive. Morwenna brings a new brine sample lemon thyme and smoked fennel. Tomas carries a fresh song written on oat parchment. Lady Brianna brings a tiny journal she calls Verse in Vinegar. Reginald brings himself, and a leaf stuck to his back leg. The Queen kneels beside a new shelf. We'll add to it, she says. Not just preserve the past, but build the future. You take out a blank scroll and begin to write. A recipe, a memory, a message, something new for the archive. Because history doesn't have to gather dust. Sometimes it should bubble dot. 2 weeks later, you're woken by a soft knock and the unmistakable clatter of urgency wrapped in porcelain. Morwenna, holding a steaming cup of beetroot chai and wearing that expression that says, something incredible happened while you were drooling on your pillow. You take the cup. She doesn't wait for you to sip. They found a map, she says, in the archive. You blink. She holds it up. It's etched on parchment made from stitched cabbage skin, remarkably preserved. The ink shimmers faintly, suggesting some sort of brine-based metallic pigment. A compass rose in the corner is shaped like a spoon. It points not north, but inward. Tomas joins the scene moments later, breathless and tripping over his slippers. We've matched the markings, he says. It's not of the kingdom, it's of a garden. Which garden, you ask? He grins. The first one. Ah, the legend. The whispers. The tale told after too much gut lace about a forgotten garden where the first court-approved cabbage was grown. Not by a noble or a servant, but by someone simply called the gardener. Historians still argue whether the garden was real or symbolic. A metaphor for balance, rebirth, and the occasional goat-gnawed leaf. But the map suggests something more. You gather your things. The Queen blesses the expedition. Reginald is already waiting by the gate with a traveling bell and an expression that says, about time. You set out at dawn, through valleys thick with morning mist over hills laced with wild garlic and flowering sage. You travel not by direction, but by flavor, using the sensory notes marked on the map. Peppery warmth, cool brine air, and the faintest smell of time-washed stone. After 3 days, you find it. Hidden in a grove where the trees form a loose circle and the earth pulses gently underfoot. No fence, no gate. Just a quiet green hush that immediately settles into your bones. And there at its heart, a patch, unremarkable at first glance. But as you approach, you see that every cabbage is different. Not in variety, though there are dozens, but in aura. Some hum, some glow. One even appears to be gently weeping, though Tomas swears it's just dew. You kneel. The soil smells like childhood and afternoon sun, and the first time you got a jar to fizz correctly. Morwenna presses her hand to the ground and whispers, "It's like it remembers us." You pick a leaf, just one, and the moment you do, the wind shifts. It smells like the anthem. You bring the leaf back to court with the same reverence usually reserved for relics and royalty. The Queen meets you at the gate. You place it in her hands, and she weeps. Not dramatically, just a few quiet tears that roll down her cheeks like memories given shape. This, she says, goes in the vault. But it doesn't. Not exactly. Instead, it's planted in the center garden, a new space created just beside the festival square. The first leaf, planted, not as an end, but as a beginning. The garden becomes a place of gathering. Children plant their own cabbages beside it. Elders sit in the shade and tell stories. Fermenters set up stalls along its edges to test new blends. And you're named caretaker, a title with no crown, no throne, no ceremonial ladle. Just a spoon, wooden, simple, worn smooth by use. Your job isn't to rule, it's to remind, to teach, to protect the space where fear once grew and wonder took root. You build benches shaped like leaves. Invite poets to write in the soil with water and sunlight. Once a month, Reginald gives tours mostly by wandering off and hoping people follow. One evening, as fireflies dance through the dill patch, you look around and realize something important. The court didn't change everything. It only remembered what had been forgotten. That flavor can be a form of memory. That small things, quiet things have the power to shape kings, topple norms, and make even the proudest noble sigh with comfort. That the most radical act isn't rebellion, it's nourishment. The garden blooms. So do you. Morning mist curls low across the garden paths like a shy cat. The first cabbages of the season stretch their leaves with a dewy sigh. You walk the paths in silence, spoon tucked in your sash, still groggy from last night's fermentation storytelling circle, where someone tried to rhyme brine with divine intervention 5 too many times. It's peaceful here. But today isn't just another garden day, because today you receive an invitation written in beet ink on pressed herb paper, sealed with the royal crest and faintly scented with thyme. You are hereby requested to attend a final tasting. No pomp, just presence, library, sunset. You know what it means. The queen is stepping down. Not from the throne, she's still very much monarch, very much in charge of what gets pickled and what gets pardoned, but from her role as spoon-bearer supreme. She's passing the torch, or rather the ladle. You dress simply. Green sash, soft boots. The first spoon you ever used polished until it almost reflects the sky. You arrive at sunset. The mural room glows gold shadows dancing on cabbage saints and garlic halos. A long table has been set, not extravagant, just honest. Simple wooden plates, cloth napkins folded like leaves, in the center one jar, labeled simply Final Court Slaw. You sit across from her. She says nothing at first. Then I thought it should be ours. You nod. She opens the jar. The scent rises complex familiar. It's lemon rosemary ash. It's smoke and rose and regret and laughter. It's every story you've lived in one humble blend. You taste. It's perfect. It doesn't try too hard. It just is. Like a deep breath you didn't know you needed. You'll take over now, she says. As guide, as guardian, as keeper of the leaf. You don't argue, because the spoon's been in your hand for some time already. That night, there's no formal ceremony. No trumpets, no proclamations written in goat ink. Just a quiet circle in the garden. You, the Queen Morwenna Tomas, Lady Brianna, a very sleepy Reginald, and a few others who've been with you since the early days. Each shares one thing, a memory of cabbage. Some are funny. One is tearful. One just ends with, and that's why I never eat slaw without a spoon carved under a waxing moon. But they all matter. At the end, you light a lantern and hang it above the first leaf. It swings gently in the night breeze, glowing like a promise. The next morning, you assume your new post officially. There's a brief flurry of paperwork, fermentation permits, slaw inspection criteria, an unusually heated debate about whether garlic counts as a neutralizer or a rogue agent. You settle in. You oversee a new wing of the archive. You greenlight a grant to study underwater pickling. Tomas's idea, it's chaos. You host a children's cabbage poetry contest. The winner is 4 years old and simply writes, "Slaw is soft and stinky. So am I." You give them a medal because they get it. Historians will one day try to label this moment the end of the slaw renaissance, the close of the brined age, the forking of the leaf path, which sounds more dramatic than it is. But really nothing ends. Things settle, like spices in the jar, like memory in the marrow, like a flavor you finally understand only after it's had time to rest. You spend more time in the garden. People visit you now, not as a noble, not as royalty, but as someone who knows where to place a spoon and when to close a lid. You give advice, sometimes about slaw, sometimes about grief, often about both, because they're more similar than people think. And in your quiet moments when the court is asleep and the wind hums low in the lavender rose, you remember how it all started. A kitchen, a whisper, a jar passed hand to hand beneath fear and hope. And now there's light and warmth and leaves stretching without shame. The wind has shifted. You feel it in the way the curtains breathe at dawn in the quiet hush that falls over the court just before the kitchen bell rings. It's not that anything is wrong, it's that something is complete. You spend the morning walking the memory vault. Each jar a bookmark in someone's life, each label a quiet sonnet. You run your fingers across the names, some faded, some still fragrant with ink, and you whisper a soft, "Good morning" to each. And then you see it. Your own. A new jar. Placed on the shelf by someone else. Its label reads simply, "The one who carried the leaf." You open it. The scent is warm, comforting, even funny. There's rosemary, roasted onion, a tickle of mint, and that grounding cabbage earthiness that somehow smells like your own hands after a good day's work. You laugh, and it echoes soft and sure through the stone hall. By afternoon, you're sitting beneath the first leaf in the center garden, reading aloud from a new collection of children's stories written entirely in rhyme. Tomas stops by with beet biscuits. Morwenna appears with a note from the monks. Apparently, they've discovered a cabbage that glows faintly in moonlight and are naming it after Reginald. You don't question it. Reginald himself trots up, headbutts your knee, then curls beside you with a sound like a sigh of legend. You hum a few lines of the royal anthem just to see if the birds will join in. One does, sort of. Off-key but earnestly. And as the sun stretches its last light across the garden, a young noble approaches, no more than 10, holding a hand-carved spoon and looking nervous. May I plant something?" they ask. You nod. Of course. They kneel beside the first leaf and bury a small seed. They don't say what it is, and you don't ask, because part of the magic is letting some things surprise you later. You stay long after they've gone, long after the lanterns blink on one by one, casting gentle light over the whispering leaves. And you feel it again. The shift? Not an ending. A soft landing. A deep exhale. You let your head rest back against the bench. You watch the stars. And somewhere nearby a jar fizzes. Just once. Like a lullaby in the dark dot. Now the garden fades to moonlight. The leaves no longer rustle, they sway slow and easy like the kingdom itself is breathing in its sleep. The lanterns grow dimmer, the air softens. Even Reginald, eternal sentinel of stubbornness, lets out one long huff and settles into stillness. Your spoon rests in your lap, no longer needed tonight. The last of the wind slips by like silk over stone. The night has no urgency anymore. Nothing to stir, nothing to solve. Just rest. You hear the faintest chime of glass from the vault. Maybe another jar sealing itself. Maybe memory curling into comfort content to wait until morning. Above you, stars begin to blur your eyelids heavier than they were a moment ago. Your breath slows, deepens. The soil beneath your feet holds you gently like a hammock in the hush. You've done enough. You've carried stories and flavors, fears and laughter. You've walked beside queens and goats across foggy hills and into the roots of memory. Now it's time to let go. Let the cabbage keep watch. Let the night steep. Let the dreams come slow and strange and soft as a spoon against a jar. Sleep now, gentle listener. The leaf will remember you. Always. Sweet dreams.